Chapter 393. As soon as Xiao Xian took out the stone, it attracted a lot of people's attention. The words on the wooden sign were simple and clear, so many people didn't look at anything else and went straight to the Yanjiao area. What is it? It's glowing. It can't be nonsense, right? That seems to be the place where the Yanjiao tribe is. Their animal skins were selling well before. Let's go and see if it's real or fake. No matter what their opinions were, curiosity had already risen in their hearts. They would rather waste more time than miss out on any possible rare item. For the purchasers sent by the slave owners, if they brought back rare items, their superiors would be happy, and they could get a lot of benefits. For the merchants, after buying from the tribes, they could change places and resell to other slave owners, and they could still make a profit. On the Yanjiao side, the goods they brought were almost all sold. After Xiao Xian took out the crystal, more and more people gathered around, and they spontaneously protected him. Every year, there were many thieves who took advantage of the chaos to steal things, and they had to keep their eyes open. This time, Xiao Xian brought a total of 10 crystals, and now he only took out one. At this time, the weather was already cold, and many people were wearing large cloak-like animal skins. It was easy to check if the crystal was really glowing, and they just had to cover it with their own coats. But don't even think about stealing. There were so many eyes around, and as long as they saw the slightest sign, they wouldn't be able to take back their claws. One by one, people squeezed over with large animal skins that completely covered the light, and covered the crystal in Xiao Xian's hand with their large animal skins. Their eyes moved closer to look. In the dim field of vision, the small crystal emitted a clear light. Holding it, they could easily see the words in the dark. Without waiting for them to look, Xiao Xian had already taken back his hand and showed it to the next person. After looking at about 50 people, Xiao Xian put away the crystal and returned to his original position. He said to the crowd, "What do you think? Are you satisfied?" Some nodded, while others remained silent. However, all of them stared at Xiao Xian with fiery eyes, waiting for him to continue. Xiao Xian didn't say anything. Duo Kong took over the mission, but he didn't tell the whole truth. He only said that they found this crystal when they were hunting fearsome beasts. They dug it out from the bottom of a river that was connected to the sea. This wasn't a lie. If that river had water, it would be bigger than the one in front of the tribe. It could be considered a big river, right? It was said that the river would flow to another, bigger river, and then the bigger river would flow into the sea. This was not wrong. As for the total number of crystals, Duo Kong only said that there were 5. This was decided by Xiao Xian, Duo Kong, and the others last night. Unlike Xiao Xian, the people who often hung around here were no strangers to Duo Kong. Therefore, they believed that Duo Kong wasn't lying. At least, he wouldn't lie completely. While Duo Kong was introducing the glowing crystals to everyone, Black Bear, who had been away for 3 days, was sitting in a stone house with a large yard in the city. He was holding a large ceramic bowl and gulping down meat soup. There was a large piece of barbecued meat on a plate next to him, which he finished in 2 or 3 bites. While Black Bear was eating, a big man hurriedly pushed open the door and came in. "Boss, the tribesmen have something again," the man shouted as he ran. Every year when the tribesmen came, they would bring some rare things. Although Black Bear had left, he still sent people to keep an eye on them. "Did something come out over there?" Black Bear wiped his mouth, put down the bowl, and asked. The Yanjiao people brought out a glowing stone. "That stone really glows." "Really, I saw it with my own eyes." The big man was afraid that Black Bear wouldn't believe him, so he quickly assured him. "Yanjiao people again?" Black Bear muttered. He put on his coat, called his men, and strode over. On the other side of the chaotic trading ground, Duo Kong had already explained the rules of the trade. They had also discussed it beforehand. They would use the auction mode, and 5 crystals would be auctioned together. This kind of crystal would definitely attract more attention. If they split the auction, the longer it dragged on, the more disadvantageous it would be for them. They might be able to get more benefits, but the risk was too great. It was better to end this quickly and leave as soon as possible. Duo Kong had already discussed it with the Taiha people. In order to let the Taiha people pack up early, Duo Kong had also given them some grains. Duo Kong took out a bronze sword that was as long as an arm. They had all been trading for a long time, so they could tell the value of this sword at a glance. Duo Kong used this as the starting price and let the others start bidding. 1 sword and a bag of grains. 2 swords. 2 swords and 5 animal skins. What, you don't want animal skins? Then let's have the grains. I promise they were just harvested this year. 2 swords and 10 bags of grains. 3 swords. Hearing the atmosphere getting hotter and hotter, and the bids getting higher and higher, Duo Kang's heart was blooming with joy. Boss, should we also fight for it? The people beside Black Bear were anxious. That kind of crystal, even if it was 5 bronze swords, it was still worth it. Once they reached the royal city, they just needed to resell and they could get even more. Black Bear's gaze swept over Xiao Xian and Duo Kong. He was about to call out a price when he heard an arrogant voice shout, "A bronze cauldron." Just as everyone was shouting with the unit of measurement that Duo Kong had given, a cauldron suddenly appeared in the midst of all the swords. It was very abrupt, like a group of pigs that suddenly screamed like a chicken being slaughtered. Whoosh, a path was forcibly broken through the crowd. 4 tall men with strong muscles opened the way in front, followed by a young man wearing a silver-gray animal skin coat. There were other people around him, and the most conspicuous one was the person standing next to him, carrying a heavy object. Every step he took left a clear footprint on the ground, and his bulging meridians pulsed like dragons, as if he was withstanding an enormous pressure. On his back, there was a heavy object wrapped in cloth. A cauldron? Everyone only felt the ground under their feet shaking with the other party's footsteps. Bang! The heavy cauldron was put down not far from Xiao Xian and Duo Kong. When it landed, it made a muffled sound with metal trembling. The people who heard it felt as if their hearts were shaken to their throats. That is, someone guessed the identity of the young man. To be able to appear in such an arrogant manner, it was naturally a slave owner in Amba City, and his status was not low. The young man who walked slowly raised his hand and swept the non-existent dust on his animal skin coat. In a tone of charity, he said to Xiao Xian and Duo Kong, "A copper cauldron. Don't you tribesmen like copper? I'll give you a cauldron, enough for you to make a lot of swords." Duo Kong almost spat out a mouthful of saliva. Listening to this tone, people who didn't know would really think that they could take advantage of it. How could a copper cauldron be the same as a cast sword? Do you really think that a copper cauldron can be easily made into another thing? Do you think we're easy to fool? When the other party pulled down the cloth, revealing the copper cauldron that reflected the dazzling light, many people present exclaimed. Looking at it this way, this cauldron was really good. Hey, that's not right. Why are the 3 legs of this cauldron not the same length? The triangular copper cauldron's 3 legs were too long and one was twisted. It was not stable on the ground, and the pattern on the copper cauldron looked blurry. Even part of the circular cauldron's body was sunken in. The slave owners here valued the cauldron very much. They used it as a ceremonial object, and certainly would not tolerate such a failure in their own homes. Now, this show-off actually took out an inferior product to bully people. What, did he think that he was giving charity to beggars and directly throwing trash? Yanjiao people didn't like slave owners. If you talked to them about strength, they would talk to you about class. If you talked to them about class, they would talk to you about class. They would never talk about the same topic. So the Yanjiao people didn't like slave owners who thought they were great. But the slave owners did have a lot of good things in their hands. There was a lot of technology and knowledge that they needed to learn. They admitted this and paid some price to learn and understand it. But it didn't mean that they were afraid of the slave owners. And when the slave owners looked at the Yanjiao people, they felt that the Yanjiao people were a group of troublemakers. They didn't listen to reason or force, and they were too damn stubborn. Unfortunately, this young master obviously didn't understand the style of the Yanjiao people. No exchange. We don't want the cauldron. We only want the swords and axes that have already been forged, Duo Kong said. He didn't expect to be rejected. The young man frowned and wasn't satisfied with Duo Kang's answer. You don't want it? We don't want the cauldron, Duo Kong confirmed again. The young man smiled, but there wasn't much of a smile in his eyes. Instead, there was a flash of darkness. You must have it. As the young man's last word fell, the person who had just put down the cauldron bent his arms and rushed forward. His arms, which seemed to have accumulated all his strength, were like ignited cannons. He pushed the cauldron on the ground towards Xiao Xian and Duo Kong. The cauldron, which was pushed up at high speed, flashed like a golden light. It left the ground and brought with it a biting cold wind and the chill of metal. It went straight for Xiao Xian, who was holding the crystal. Black Bear thought that Duo Kong would intervene. After all, in this kind of situation, usually the one who intervened was the leader of the group. They represented the entire tribe. Their opinion was the decision of the entire group. Fight or compromise? The onlookers thought to themselves. But to everyone's surprise, Duo Kong, who was standing closest to Xiao Xian, didn't make a move. He still stood in the same spot. Xiao Xian, who was facing the cauldron, lowered his waist and bent his knees. His whole body was like a mountain that was rooted to the ground. He raised one arm and pressed it against the cauldron. He actually chose to take it head-on. Bang! With the reverberation of heavy metal, it was as if a huge drum had suddenly been struck, producing a deafening sound wave. Even the golden light reflected by the three-legged cauldron seemed to have been completely dispersed in that instant. The moment the sound rang out, everyone in the tribe's trading area was shocked. What happened? This was what those who didn't see what happened were thinking. What happened? This was the person who saw the whole thing but couldn't react. Black Bear's eyelids kept twitching. That kid actually took it head-on with one hand. Bang! There was another sound. This time, it was different from the explosion of sound waves. This time, it was the sound of a heavy object falling to the ground. The body of the cauldron, which was almost as tall as a person, fell to the ground again. The surrounding soil and stones were shaken away. The dust was blown away by the wind, but the cauldron didn't move forward an inch. It stopped in front of Xiao Xian. Chapter 394. Because of the protection of his subordinates and several slaves, and Ping, who sat there with a proud posture, did not suffer much damage from the momentum. Only the sound just now hurt his ears. Pushing aside the people in front of him, and Ping frowned and looked at the person standing there like a mountain. He looked at the totem pattern on the other's body and seemed to have seen it before, but he couldn't remember. And Ping cursed his bad luck. Today was really unlucky. He went to check the goods early in the morning and brought back the pre-ordered cauldron. Who knew that there would be a mistake in the cauldron casting? In a fit of anger, he let the slaves around him carry the cauldron away, intending to find someone else to cast the cauldron. There were so many people in the Yin family, why let an outsider cast the cauldron? What's more, it was cheaper to cast the cauldron himself. However, when he came out of the cauldron casting, he heard someone say that there were treasures in the free trade zone, so he brought people over. He wanted to exchange a useless cauldron for those treasures. Not only could he get rid of the failed product, but he could also show his generosity. If the other party did not give him face, he would use force. Who would have thought that such a situation would occur? What were the people around him saying, Yanjiao tribe? The name was a bit familiar. Meeting that pair of eyes, and Ping actually felt a sense of fear. And Ping had no choice but to look elsewhere, but his neck seemed to be particularly stiff when he turned around. Xiao Xian, who had been sitting there, had stood up because of the cauldron. At this time, the hand that blocked the cauldron was still on the body of the cauldron. His feet were apart, his knees were propped up, and his body was slightly crouched. He stood there steadily, giving people the feeling that a sleeping beast had opened its eyes after being provoked. Savage like a beast, this was the evaluation of the people of Amba City who lived in remote places. The Yanjiao tribe in front of him was also the same in Ping's heart. And in Ping's eyes, the moment this savage beast woke up, a powerful aura erupted from its body. That was not the power that an ordinary, savage beast could produce. That ferocious aura that rampaged just now was something that no one present could ignore, no matter how slow they were. Tricky. That was Ping's thought at the moment. After the silence, there was a burst of noise. They thought that the person in charge here was Duo Kong. Even if it wasn't Duo Kong, it would be Guang Yi. They didn't expect it to be the young man who took out the gem. Who is that person? Are all the young people in Yanjiao so powerful? Hee, look at that city guy's expression. I wonder if the two sides will really start fighting. It's good to fight. We can take advantage of the opportunity to pick up some good stuff. I heard that the Yanjiao people got a lot of good stuff these days. Although many people had other thoughts, they knew to keep their voices down and not say it out loud. They just kept their eyes fixed on the movements on the field, waiting for the opportunity to explode. And Ping's eyelids trembled slightly. For a moment, he really didn't know what to say. The people around Anping rolled their eyes and immediately seized the opportunity to stand up, wanting to leave a good impression in front of Anping. He took a step forward and pointed his finger at Xiao Xian and the others. He raised his chin and said, "What? Do you want to be enemies with the 6 tribes of Amba?" Because they used to belong to one of the 6 strongest tribes, even if they were later merged and subdued, the people of the Amba tribe, who were now the people of An City, still liked to call themselves the 6 tribes of Amba. This way, they would have face and satisfy their vanity. Unfortunately, for the Yanjiao people, it didn't matter if you were from the 6 tribes of Amba or the 7 tribes of Amba. If you stepped on our bottom line, don't blame us for fighting back. Xiao Xian looked at the other side calmly and said, "I heard that you 6 tribes of Amba like cauldrons. We'd better not take what you love. This cauldron is yours." It was clearly an ordinary-looking hand. Compared to the enormous cauldron, it was so tiny. However, the scene from before gave people the feeling that the entire cauldron was enveloped by this hand. At this moment, it was the same. Bang! As the hand on the cauldron retracted and slapped, there was another sound of metal trembling. It was heavy with a high-pitched sound and unrestrained murderous intent. Once again, it resounded throughout the entire free trade zone. The cauldron, reflecting the golden light of the sun, turned into a stream of light and flew straight to the person who had just jumped out. The cauldron flew so fast that the person who had just jumped out couldn't avoid it at all. Under the collision, the skin on the surface of the person's body seemed to suddenly split open, bursting out several bloody marks. Blood splashed from the cracks, and the sound of broken arm bones and sternum was completely suppressed by the sound made by the cauldron. All the people around saw was the figure of the person who flew out upside down with blood spurting out. When he fell to the ground, there was a long trail of blood. The cauldron fell to the ground. Because the 3 feet were uneven, it couldn't be stabilized. After landing, it buzzed and swayed several times before standing crookedly. At this time, the flaws of the cauldron were completely exposed. Black Bear looked at the crooked cauldron with contempt in his eyes. They didn't even bother to look at this kind of thing. As for the idiot who took out this thing and wanted to force a trade, he deserved to be slapped in the face. Not only Black Bear, but even the others who were thinking about how to pick up the scraps secretly felt that this was a good slap in the face. Did they really think that their tribesmen's eyelids were shallow and that they could be dealt with by a little broken thing? Although the onlookers retreated a little further, as if they wanted to stay away from the battlefield, they didn't really leave. They didn't mind watching a show. Moreover, for most of the tribesmen here, they usually gave face to the people surnamed in Amba City, but they weren't really afraid of them. Naturally, they were happy to see the Yinjiao people humiliate the Ans. Anyway, this matter didn't involve them. On the other side, seeing his subordinates on the ground, and Ping's expression twisted. This was a provocation. A provocation to the authority of Amba City. Unable to sit still any longer, and Ping suddenly stood up and waved his hand. Beat them. After a pause, he added, get those glowing stones back for me. After receiving the order, several figures around and Ping rushed straight to Xiao Xian. But this time, Xiao Xian didn't move. When the other side rushed over, several figures also rushed out from his side and behind him. Duo Kong and Guang Yi rushed to the front. Did they think they were dead? If they all relied on Xiao Xian to fight alone, they would be scolded by the shaman and chief when they returned. There was the sound of metal clashing, as well as the collision of bones and muscles. Fists and feet collided, and with the sound of bones breaking, a figure smashed to the ground. Puff 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 puff, another sound of people falling to the ground rang out one after another. And Ping's twisted face became even more ferocious with these sounds, but he didn't have the guts to fight personally. After smashing the last person who rushed out to the ground, Duo Kong and the others returned to their own camp and stood around Xiao Xian. Duo Kong took out an axe that he had exchanged not long ago and threw it to Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian caught the axe and turned the handle between his fingers. Then he held the handle firmly in his palm and looked at An Ping and the others not far away. Without the paint, the flame-like totemic patterns on their bodies were fully displayed. If there was only one beast that had just woken up from a deep slumber, now there was a group of beasts. The aura of 100 people was almost twisted together like a burning axe, ready to break through all obstacles. Strong, fearless. Even the bystanders who had retreated could feel the pressure clearly. You have your untouchable status, I have my overbearing and unreasonable ways. Don't try to reason with me. In the free trade area, the first person to break the rules has no right to talk about reason. No matter what, the Yinjiao people's bottom line was always very clear. You want something? Alright, just do as we say. Take out as much as you need, not a single one less. Otherwise, we'll beat you up. There was a sense of anxiety in the air. Even the onlookers didn't dare to make a noise. At this time, a clear voice suddenly came from outside the crowd. What's going on? As the voice fell, the crowd parted to form a path. Unlike An Ping, the person who appeared at this time wasn't so ostentatious, but he was more eye-catching. Many of the tribesmen in the trading area knew him. An Ping gave people a sense of vanity, but the person who appeared at this time had a noble aura. This was a member of the main bloodline of An City. Hearing the voice, An Ping's face suddenly changed. He put away his other expressions, and his eyes were filled with panic and fear. But thinking about it, what did he do wrong? How could the tribesmen not be willing to take advantage of him? Thinking of this, An Ping quickly walked towards that person. Seeing the other person's gaze, An Ping shrank his neck and continued to complain. The first thing he said was, those barbarians, not only the Yinjiao people, but also many of the tribesmen who were watching the show, raised their eyebrows. Barbarians? At least I abide by the basic rules here. What about you guys? Do you think I won't show you how barbaric I am? An Yen stood there quietly, listening to An Ping's complaint. His expression didn't change, and he didn't interrupt. Instead, he stretched out his palm. It didn't seem to have any offensive power, but when it hit An Ping's body, An Ping directly spat out a mouthful of blood and flew out. The crowd watching the show hurriedly made way for An Ping to fall directly to the ground. If it weren't for An Yen here, they would have stepped on him a few more times. An Yen looked down on what An Ping did. He only felt that how could an city raise such an idiot? Fortunately, they were in charge of this branch. As for the other branches and Ping belonged to, those who could raise idiots were naturally a bunch of idiots and trash. And Yen looked down on them even more. And Yen knew that the tribesmen in the trading area were angry, so he simply used an Ping to appease the tribesmen in the trading area. Looking at the people around him, sure enough, after seeing an Ping get beaten, the anger on their faces faded a lot. Looking around with a faint smile, An Yen said in a clear voice, "My city also follows the rules. Since we provide a place for everyone to trade, naturally we will abide by these rules." After he finished speaking, he looked at Xiao Xian and the others. He waved his hand to have people bring over a large box. An Yen said, "That crystal stone, I will pay 5 swords and 5 bags of grains. Is there anyone else who wants to increase the price?" The surroundings were quiet. Even if they weren't convinced, after thinking about it, they still gave up. First of all, they really couldn't afford the price an city offered. Second of all, they didn't want to compete with the young master of an city. This young master still followed the rules, so they also gave him face. Black Bear's eyes flashed with ridicule when no one was paying attention. Rules? Rules my ass. Chapter 395. Duo Kong looked at Xiao Xian, and when he saw Xiao Xian nod, he went over to count. Xiao Xian also took out the 5 crystals. "In that case, these things are naturally yours." An Yen smiled, and the anxious atmosphere from before dissipated. Letting people take the crystals away, An Yen also let people drag the cauldron that was standing crookedly on the ground. "This cauldron is a gift to you as an apology." Although the cauldron was a failure, it was still bronze after all. If it was not satisfactory as a weapon, it could be used to make other things. Even Black Bear felt that this gift was good. Duo Kong naturally felt that this gift was very cost-effective, but it also depended on Xiao Xian's thoughts. Young people were, after all, impetuous. Sometimes, in order to fight, it was understandable that they did not want the benefits in their hands. Unexpectedly, Xiao Xian smiled and did not refuse. "Thank you." After the two sides completed the transaction, An Yen left with his people, and the trading point returned to its previous state. However, those who wanted to take advantage of the situation were quite disappointed. They regretted that they did not fight. The people of the Yanjiao tribe packed up their things and left amidst the discussion of the people around them. The people of the Taiha tribe also left. This was something they had arranged long ago. On the other side, the people around Black Bear watched the Yanjiao people leave. They raised their thick fingers and pointed in the direction the Yanjiao people left. "Boss, should we follow them?" "Of course. I don't believe that's all they have." Black Bear grinned. The people of the Yanjiao and Taiha skillfully left Amba City, took care of a group of followers, and then quickly left along the road they came from. Originally, Duo Kong planned to go another way. This was what they did every time. When they came, they would take one road, and when they went back, they would take another road. It was safer this way. However, Xiao Xian suggested that they go along the original road for a while, and then change. Anyway, the two roads were not far from each other at the beginning, so it was not too late to change. There wasn't much cover around this section of the road, so if there was anyone, they would be able to discover it in advance. At first, the people from Taiha were against Xiao Xian's decision, but fortunately, they would still change their route when the time came. After thinking about it, they reluctantly accepted it. However, it was natural for them to have their own opinions, so they didn't give him any face. The large cauldron had already been wrapped in a green-gray cloth, so it wasn't as conspicuous as before. The Yanjiao people were strong, so it wasn't that strenuous for them to carry it. After a while, they would switch to another person to carry it one by one, so it wouldn't take too much time. The journey back was much more dangerous. There were quite a few robberies. Previously, when they saw the Yanjiao people picking up good stuff, there were already quite a few groups who wanted to rob them. This time, no one held back. Those who needed to be killed were killed. So, a slight sound was heard. More robbers. Everyone was on high alert. Xiao Xian smiled when he saw the approaching figure. "They're finally here," Xiao Xian said. "You knew we were coming?" Black Bear asked doubtfully. "I guessed." Xiao Xian didn't say anything else. He had only noticed Black Bear's gaze when he was leaving, and based on other people's evaluation of Black Bear, he had made a final guess. That was why he had everyone follow the original path. The danger level of this journey was not high, and if no one came after this journey, they would switch to another path. Black Bear's thick eyebrows twitched, then he laughed loudly. "You Yanjiao people are really interesting." If they could guess that he was coming, then they could definitely guess something else. The Yanjiao people were smarter than he thought. Seeing that it was Black Bear, the others relaxed slightly. Duo Kong walked up and asked, "Could it be that you still want to trade with us?" They had left in a hurry, so they still had some things that they hadn't sold. There were even more people from Taihe left. Hearing this, they looked at Black Bear expectantly. "That's right," Black Bear said in a rough voice. "I know you still have those glowing crystals. I'll trade with you at the same price as in yen. How about that?" Seeing Xiao Xian nod, Duo Kong was happy. When he heard that Black Bear would buy all of their remaining goods, Duo Kang's eyes narrowed into slits. The people from Taihe were no longer angry. In fact, they were quite grateful for Xiao Xian's decision. Now that they had sold all of their goods, it would be easier for them to go back. After letting his men complete the trade, Black Bear asked Xiao Xian about the use of the glowing crystals. After Xiao Xian finished, Black Bear touched the thick leather hat on his head, took out a piece of bone engraved with a bear pattern, and handed it to Xiao Xian. "If you have such goods in the future, you can come to us directly. I'll still eat the animal skin and other goods. Oh, and that stone carving of yours, if you have it, I also want it. It's best if it's a giant bear, but if there's no giant bear, other things are fine too." Black Bear also mentioned their base in Amba City. Coupled with the bone plate, if Black Bear wasn't in Amba City, they could still trade as usual. The Yanjiao people didn't have to worry about being cheated. Cooperation. The Taihe people were a little surprised. Black Bear's reputation was indeed good, but he didn't always have a fixed partner. They had trading forces everywhere, so they didn't have to be afraid of the people of Amba City. Even if they were enemies of Amba City, they would still trade with them, not to mention the Yanjiao people who only had a little friction with them. But even so, the Taihe people were still surprised that Black Bear would find Yanjiao people to cooperate. Could it be that he really took a fancy to Yanjiao's crystals? After the trade was completed, Black Bear added, "Don't believe the people of Amba City, especially when they mention rules. Because in the hearts of the Amba people of the 6 tribes, what they say is the rules. The people of Amba City never had fixed rules. In the past, when the Yanjiao people went to Amba City to trade, it wasn't conspicuous, and there weren't many things that they really valued. But this time was different. The Yanjiao people not only beat the people of Amba City, but also took out things that would cause trouble." "Thank you for telling us," Xiao Xian thanked him. "Even if I didn't tell you, you would still be on guard." Black Bear's eyes swept over a large wooden box next to Xiao Xian. "Can I know what's inside?" Just now, when Xiao Xian moved the box, he heard a little sound. It wasn't the sound of metal, but more like the sound of stones colliding. Could it be that there was still something good that hadn't been taken out? As a businessman, sometimes his curiosity was still very strong. Otherwise, how could he smell a business opportunity? "Those are not things for trade." Xiao Xian refused. With that said, Black Bear was even more curious. He pestered Xiao Xian for a while, promised some other benefits, and took out some small bronze objects as gifts. Only then did he let Xiao Xian open the box. When he saw the things inside, Black Bear was stunned for a moment, then burst out laughing. Then, in a good mood, he called his men to leave. The people of the Taiha tribe, because of their angle, did not see what was in Xiao Xian's box. What was inside was not the things that Xiao Xian exchanged with the crystal stones. Naturally, it was something else. What was it? Ignoring the curious gazes of the people of the Taiha tribe, Xiao Xian packed up his things and planned to set off again. The person he was waiting for had arrived, so it was time to change his route. With Black Bear as a partner, the Yanjiao people would not have to worry about being rejected by the people of Amba City when they brought things to trade. After taking 2 steps, Xiao Xian stopped again. He saw that the cloth wrapped around the cauldron had been torn. Guang Yi was letting people wrap it with other cloth. Although this was a failed cauldron, the material and parts of the cauldron were still very exquisite. The body of the cauldron was heavy and thick, and the engravings and words on it were full of an ancient and fierce sense of mystery. At that time, when An Yen proposed to give the cauldron as a gift to the Yanjiao people as an apology, the others felt that because the cauldron was a bronze object, it could be recast into other objects or exchanged for more benefits, so the Yanjiao people accepted the gift. But Xiao Xian agreed to accept the cauldron not entirely because of this. The main reason was that he was very interested in the engravings and words on the cauldron. The people of the great 6 cities used the cauldron as a ceremonial object. The cauldron symbolized power. Whether it was a major celebration or a reward for people, many times they would record some more special things on the cauldron, representing different meanings. And Xiao Xian was interested in this. Yes, most of the people here were literate, but the extent of their knowledge was very limited. The words they were familiar with were the words commonly used in daily transactions. As for the more complicated words, there were fewer people who understood them. Some of the more complicated sentences were extremely simple but profound, just like the conclusion used by the tribe in the past. They were even more confusing, so there were even fewer people who cared about them. Many people made their own weapons, but never added words on it. At most, they added their tribe's totem or name, and nothing else. They felt that it was too troublesome, and were not as particular as the people of the great 6 cities. Not only did they add words, but they also drew a lot of other patterns that were superfluous to them. Just like this cauldron, although they knew that there were words on the cauldron, they only felt that it was for decorative purposes and could not understand it. They were also not interested in these things, so naturally they would not look at it. When the cauldron was wrapped up again, Xiao Xian's gaze moved away from it. Let's change our route. Duo Kong called the rest of the people who were still resting, and the group set off again. On the other side, Black Bear led his people away. There were also people who tried to rob them, but they were all dealt with quickly. Boss, you saw that kid from the Yanjiao tribe in the box. What was in it? One of the people in Black Bear's team pulled a leaf from a nearby tree, wiped the blood on his sword, and asked. Something interesting, Black Bear replied. What could make you laugh like that? Everyone was puzzled. How many of the people An Yen sent out, do you think will come back? Black Bear asked. They had a wide network of people in An City, so they were naturally aware of An Yan's movements. Don't be fooled by An Yan's righteous appearance in front of others. He kept talking about the rules, but in reality, he was ruthless. As soon as the Yanjiao people set off, he sent people to chase after them. He also knew that the Yanjiao people used to take a different route back, so he sent people to chase them in that direction. He did not expect that the Yanjiao people would go back the way they came. However, they would definitely meet the Yanjiao people later on. Speaking of which, neither route was safe. On one side, there were people from other tribes waiting to ambush them, and on the other, there was An Yan's people chasing after them. If it was before, Black Bear might have sympathized with the Yanjiao people, but now, Black Bear felt that the other side might be the unlucky one. The others in the group were still discussing Black Bear's words. Seeing Black Bear's gloating face, they could not help but ask, "Boss, how many of Yan's people do you think will come back? Even if they fail, at least half of them will come back, right?" "Half? Hey, 10 or 20 is more like it. How is that possible?" The others did not believe it. "Is it a trap? That's impossible." It was not that they looked down on the Yanjiao people, but they knew that most tribesmen still cherished weapons. Even if they set up an ambush, they would choose wood, rope, and so on. If that was not enough, they would use all kinds of medicine. As for metal, they were pitifully few, because they were reluctant to use it. The lethality of wood compared to metal was, of course, much smaller. Bone was very restrictive and inconvenient to use, so in the use of many traps, many tribesmen may not be able to compare to the people of the 6 great cities. Not everyone was as generous as the slave masters of the 6 great cities. In this world, there are not only wood and metal. Black Bear sighed. Stone tools, this thing that had almost disappeared from the stage of history, he saw in the Yanjiao people. Moreover, they were very meticulously made, as if the maker had already thought about how to use those stone tools. Like a spider perched in a hidden corner, when it pulled out the first silk, it knew what kind of web it was going to weave. Chapter 396. When Xiao Xian was in the free trade area, before he took out the crystal stones, he would spend his free time every night polishing stone tools. Because the animal skins sold quickly, many of the Yanjiao people were idle for the next few days. Xiao Xian asked them to find stones, and then choose the stones they were satisfied with and polish them into the required stone tools. Xiao Xian learned from Duo Kong and the others what kind of terrain the road back was, how high the mountains were, how much vegetation was distributed, how many species of animals and plants there were, and so on. Therefore, when he was polishing the stone tools, he had already thought about what kind of traps and nooses to set up. Even if there were no crystal stones, according to Duo Kang's past experience, they would still encounter a lot of robbers. In the free trade area of Amba City, many people could talk and laugh with you one day, but the next day they could ambush you in the mountains and kill you. When going out to trade, it was necessary to be vigilant. Therefore, Xiao Xian made these stone tools to prevent too many people from chasing after them. Stone tools were not like gold tools. As long as there were no special requirements, the requirements for stone were not very high. Usable stone materials were everywhere in the mountains and forests, unlike gold tools, which were not distressed to waste. For many tribesmen, a small dagger could be precious. Of course, it was impossible to throw out gold tools like darts or hidden weapons. If they threw them away and couldn't get them back, they would definitely be distressed. Obviously, the people sent out by Yan to chase after them had the same idea. They inquired about the Yanjiao people's previous style of conduct and inquired about their past deeds, but they had never heard that they would use large-scale traps and hidden weapons on their way back, so they didn't care about chasing after them. At first, because the Yanjiao people did not follow the original route, they didn't see any figures. Later, when they saw footprints and other traces of walking, they excitedly continued to chase until they heard the slight sound of a string bouncing. It was as if a bird had flown up from a tree, and then they were faced with dense wooden thorns. It was really too sudden. Even if they reacted quickly, they couldn't completely avoid the sudden attack of the wooden thorns. One of the members of the team waved the sword in his hand, and the sword shadows formed a shield, blocking the wooden thorns that were shot at him. At the same time, he kicked the ground with the tip of his foot and quickly bounced away, trying to avoid these wooden thorns. However, when he landed again, he stepped on something. He felt as if there was a thin rope suddenly pulled out from under his feet, and then there were wooden thorns coming at him from the side. Not only that, every time he took a step back, he would trigger a hidden noose, and then round after round of attacks. There were so many people in the team. As long as one or two of them triggered the trap, once they panicked, they would trigger the other traps. It would be impossible to guard against them. Wooden thorns were not as hard as metal, but when they were shot out at high speed, they could still injure people. Furthermore, there were other things on the wooden thorns. Once they broke through the skin, the poison on the thorns would spread through the blood. It would not kill them, but it would cause them a lot of trouble. It would also affect the speed of their pursuit. Bang! With a soft sound, a cloud of light yellow powder suddenly exploded in the air. Like a fog, it quickly spread out. Those who could escape from the battle hurriedly jumped away. No matter what it was better to avoid it. The people who were attacked by the wooden thorns thought that it was some kind of poison. They held their breath and waited until they blocked the wooden thorns and jumped out of the attack range. When they saw the light yellow smoke dissipate, they breathed again. When everything finally stopped, the leader looked at the people who were rolling on the ground and secretly said, "Trash." His gaze shifted to a tree beside him. There were more than 10 thin wooden thorns nailed to it. He carefully moved over, and after making sure that nothing else was triggered, he quickly reached out and plucked a leaf. He wrapped it around a wooden thorn and pulled it out of the tree trunk. This was a wooden thorn from a plant in the mountains. The end of the wooden thorn still had some greenish-brown marks, indicating that it hadn't been long since it was pulled out. In the forest, there were many such plants, but many animals had rough skin and dry flesh. These wooden thorns weren't much of a threat to the animals with thick fur, but humans were different. They didn't have thick fur to protect them, nor did they wear armor. After being hit, they would be affected by the poison on the wooden thorns. Fortunately, the poison wasn't strong and wouldn't kill them. The tribesmen liked to use these little things. The leader sneered. However, who was the one who had set up the continuous attacks that were as dense as raindrops? Was it an ambush by others? Or was it the Yanjiao people who left? There was a faint sweet fragrance in the air. He didn't know if it was the fragrance of the flowers on the tree or something else. The leader threw away the wooden thorn in his hand and frowned. He glanced around with hazy eyes. Even after several rounds of attacks, they still couldn't find any traces of a trap. Keep chasing. Ignoring the people on the ground who were affected by the poison, the others planned to continue forward. Everyone, be careful. Those tribesmen like to use these little things. The leader said. In their eyes, these were all little tricks made of wood and flowers. But, after just 2 steps, they didn't know who stepped on something, but there was a short sound of rattling vines. Everyone's nerves suddenly tightened, and they clenched the weapons in their hands. The leader grabbed a bronze shield from one of the team members and vigilantly looked in the direction of the sound. However, they did not receive a new wave of wooden spikes. Instead, they saw a few strange wooden objects that resembled crescent moons fly out. Furthermore, they did not fly towards them. Instead, they flew in a direction far away from them. The flying wooden objects accurately passed through the gaps between the branches in the forest. They weren't blocked by the thick trunks and dense branches. Instead, they rushed out of the cover of the leaves and flew in an arc into the distance. Bang bang bang. They didn't know what the flying wooden objects hit, but when they heard the sound, the pursuers' hearts jumped and their nerves tightened again. After the wooden objects hit something, they flew in other directions. Then, some dense whooshing sounds came. Realizing what it was, the leader shouted, "It's the leaf-piercing bee. Dodge!" Unlike the buzzing sound made by other mountain bees, the flying sound of the leaf-piercing bee was very special. It was similar to the whooshing sound of an arrow passing through. They were 2 to 3 times larger than ordinary bees and flew very fast. Because of the cone-shaped hard armor in front of their heads, they could easily pass through the leaves. Being stung by them, the consequences were much worse than the wooden thorns. There's actually a leaf-piercing bee's hive around here. The leader said angrily. The leaf-piercing bee generally didn't take the initiative to attack, but once it got angry, it was very aggressive. Moreover, the leaf-piercing bee's hive was very large. Almost every hive in the forest occupied a whole tree, so the number of bees was naturally large. Except for those beasts with thick skin who liked to steal honey and were talented, other beasts in the forest kept a respectful distance from the leaf-piercing bee's hive. And these pursuers obviously didn't expect that the Yanjiao people would take the path of the leaf-piercing bee. The wooden objects that flew out just now were targeted at the leaf-piercing bee's hive. The hive was attacked, and the leaf-piercing bees were angry. Just by listening to the sound of the leaves being passed through, one could know the mood of the leaf-piercing bee at this time. As soon as they heard that it was the leaf-piercing bee, the others in the team panicked and quickly spread out to distract the attention of the leaf-piercing bees. If those leaf-piercing bees went after the others, they could also escape this disaster. However, even if they spread out, there were always leaf-piercing bees chasing after them. It was the light yellow powder with a slightly sweet smell. Thinking of the reason, the leader was angry and aggrieved. If it was a head-on fight, then it was nothing. He was annoyed that the tribesmen's little tricks could kill people. Many of those leaf-piercing bees were slapped to the ground with a sword, but the more it was like this, the angrier the leaf-piercing bees were. The whooshing sound in the forest continued. A man touched the noose because he was trying to avoid the wasps and was hung up by his feet. Before he could use his sword to cut the vines, he was clamped by two large clamps with sharp stone awls on both sides, like the mouth of a giant beast. He didn't even have the chance to scream. In an instant, the blood spread. Similar situations happened everywhere else. Some were tied up, some fell into the potholes, and then what greeted them was the real killing move. The whooshing sound of the leaf-piercing bees, the dense whooshing sound like rain, and the panicked screams of the pursuers mixed together in the forest. At the foot of the mountain, two groups of people were hurrying on. It was the Yanjiao and the Taiha tribe. They could hear a little of the movement on the mountain. Not only the Yanjiao people, but the Taiha tribe people also glanced at Xiao Xian from time to time. They didn't know what Xiao Xian had done. After changing paths, Xiao Xian told them to hurry on with all their might, ignoring the traces left on the ground. Then Xiao Xian brought a few people to cover their backs. Before leaving, he asked the Taiha tribe people for some medicine. Because it was for the safety of the two teams, the Taiha tribe people didn't hide anything. They gave Xiao Xian everything he asked for. The powder that attracted the leaf-piercing bees was made by the Taiha people. They dared to walk near the leaf-piercing bee's nest because the Taiha people had a way to avoid the leaf-piercing bees. The team waited for a while at the foot of the mountain. Xiao Xian came back with people, but the expressions on the faces of the people who came back were very strange. Some were at a loss, but some were looking forward to it. Duo Kong was one of them. He originally thought that Xiao Xian brought them to block the pursuers, but he didn't expect that when they reached the mountainside, Xiao Xian told them to stop and then assign tasks. They were to break with thorns, cut wood, find vines, and then Xiao Xian carried his wooden box and continued to walk up the mountain with those things, starting to arrange them. Xiao Xian said that he could block the pursuers, but Duo Kong didn't believe it. Now that he heard the movement on the mountain, it might really be like what Xiao Xian said. Flap flap, a flock of birds flew over the team in the sky. Those birds. The Taiha tribesmen's eyes narrowed as they looked at the sky. Their gazes followed the birds, and they looked at the mountain behind them that was constantly moving. Those birds were scavenger birds. They could smell blood from far away and then follow the smell to find food. When hunting in the forest, they would also judge what was happening based on the movements of the scavenger birds. Now, the place where the scavenger birds were flying was the place where the Yanjiao people had set up the trap. "Are those people all dead?" someone in the team asked Xiao Xian. "It's not that easy," Xiao Xian replied, "but after a few more times, there shouldn't be many left." A few more times, the Yanjiao people and the Taiha people looked up at Xiao Xian at the same time, then looked away and hurried on in silence. Chapter 397. The team didn't cover their tracks. Even if they did, they wouldn't be able to cover them completely, so they didn't bother. There were a few hundred people carrying goods and cauldrons. It was impossible for them to not leave a trace in the forest. After a while, Xiao Xian would set up some more traps. The Taihe people would also help. Their drugs would make Xiao Xian's traps even more pleasurable. As long as the people behind them continued to follow their footsteps, they could continue to enjoy themselves. If they could use skills to deal with the enemy, why would they need to use brute force? The Yanjiao and Taihe people were happy to see this. They didn't need to waste time and manpower to deal with the pursuers. They only needed to be on guard against the people who had been lying in ambush in the forest. This greatly reduced the pressure on them. 2 days later, the number of ambushes had decreased. They didn't see a single person after half a day. Duo Kong relaxed. It was finally over. From now on, they only needed to be on guard against the beasts in the mountains. Because of Xiao Xian's traps, the people behind them didn't catch up. Occasionally, they would see a flock of scavenger birds chirping as they flew overhead. Along the way, they saw Xiao Xian making stone tools. During the break, the people in the team were still in the mood to ask Xiao Xian how to use and make stone tools. If they were ever trapped in the forest and didn't have any other weapons, they could make stone tools to save themselves. Hearing Xiao Xian say that because their team had very few gold tools, they basically used stone tools. If it was before, everyone would have imagined a powerful image of a person holding a huge rock to smash a beast. However, after experiencing the events of the past 2 days, everyone realized that stone tools could also play a big role. It was not just the skill of smashing rocks. When they didn't have any metal tools, the brothers in the other team used all kinds of stone tools to deal with the beasts in the mountains. The brothers in the other team were really fierce. If there was a chance, they really wanted to meet them and have an in-depth discussion. As for the stones Xiao Xian mentioned, many people were confused. From their point of view, all stones looked the same. Guang Yi, who was face-blind, was the fastest learner in distinguishing stones. When the people of Yanjiao and Taihe returned to their tribes, on the other side, in Amba City, and Yen looked at a dozen people covered in blood and mud standing in front of him. He was so angry that his face turned green. With a flick of his hand, he threw the palm-sized wine cup on the ground. A bunch of trash. The person who was scolded stood there, trembling with fear. He lowered his head and did not say a word. This time, they had indeed lost a lot of people. Encountering those continuous traps was one of them. They were also robbed by other tribesmen and suffered many casualties. Once they were out of Amba City, the other tribesmen put away their smiles. Whatever they could rob, it didn't matter if they were from the 6 tribes of Amba or anyone else. The immediate benefits were the most important. Because of the trap, many of the people in Yen sent out were injured. They were also taken advantage of. He sent out more than 100 people, but in the end, only a dozen came back. How could an Yen not be angry? It was like being pressed by a big stone in the chest. It was so stuffy that he wanted to vomit blood. The Yanjiao people didn't get the remaining crystal stones in their hands, and they didn't even get the bronze cauldron back. Why did An Yen easily give away such a big bronze cauldron as a gift? One was to attract hatred. Giving it away in front of so many people in the free trading area would definitely attract more people's attention to the Yanjiao tribe's trading team. Of course, An Yen was happy to borrow other people's hands to cause trouble for the Yanjiao people. The second reason was to use the bronze cauldron to delay the Yanjiao people's pace. It was definitely inconvenient to carry such a big cauldron in the mountains and forests. It would also leave traces of walking, making it easier to track. But the result was like a loud slap, mercilessly slapping An Yen in the face. Bronze was still very rare to the tribesmen, and the casting process was complicated. Every cauldron, especially those large ones, required a lot of manpower and material resources. Because of its rarity, it had always been exclusive to the slave masters since its creation. Moreover, it was only owned by the leaders of the 6 tribes. Those with lower status in the city did not have the ability to own one at all. Most people could only use pottery cauldrons. Of course, as the descendant of the leader, An Yen had the right to give cauldrons to others, but to give it to the tribesmen? An Yen really didn't think about this. Even if it was a failed casting cauldron, he didn't want to give it to the tribesmen directly. He only wanted to use it as a chess piece. But he didn't expect that this chess piece would be snatched away. How could he expect the tribesmen to spit out something that was taken back? Bang! Probably because he felt that the bronze wine cup wasn't enough to vent his anger, and Yen smashed an exquisitely made ceramic cup with an extremely thin body. Get out! Seeing these people standing in front of him, An Yen was angry. If it weren't for the fact that he still needed these people after losing so many people, he would have already dragged these wastes out and beheaded them. The next time the Yanjiao people came to Amba City's free trade area, he would definitely teach them a lesson. Unfortunately, what An Yen didn't know was that the Yanjiao people had already made a deal with Black Bear and didn't need to run to the free trade area. By the time the Yanjiao and Taiha teams returned to the tribe, the weather in the mountain forest had obviously turned cold. Standing at a high place, they could see the yellowed leaves everywhere in the mountain forest. It wouldn't be long before those leaves completely fell, and at that time, winter would come. After going out to trade, the Taiha tribe people learned one thing: it was better not to provoke Yanjiao's little elder. He could fight head-on. Playing dirty? He could still do it. Especially the few people who fought Xiao Xian before. They were glad that Xiao Xian didn't trap them at that time. Otherwise, they would have been tortured to death or angered to death. After parting with the Taiha people, Duo Kong led the team back to the tribe with a smile on his face. The big cauldron that reflected the golden light was also carried by Duo Kong. At this time, there was no need to hide it. He lifted the cloth to reveal the body of the cauldron, which was quite eye-catching. Looking at Duo Kong, who couldn't wait to jump up and show off with the cauldron, Guangyi pursed his lips and called for the others to follow. Walking through the forest, they saw the river outside the tribe. On the other side of the river, Chief Sheng Luo led the tribe people and stood there to welcome the trading team. The big cauldron Duo Kong carried almost blinded the eyes of the people who came to welcome them. Zheng Luo's first reaction when he saw the big cauldron was disbelief. He closed his eyes and opened them again. Duo Kong was still carrying the shining cauldron with a grin on his face. If they didn't exchange for something useful, how could they exchange for a big cauldron? And it was a flat one. If they used it to cook, it wouldn't even be as good as the big stone pot left by their ancestors. Seeing that the cauldron was unstable, Zheng Luo's expression darkened. What's going on? Zheng Luo went forward to ask. If Duo Kong had exchanged for this cauldron with weapons, he would immediately call for a tribal meeting and remove Duo Kong from his position as chief. Duo Kong put down the cauldron and shook his arms to loosen his muscles. Then he smiled and said, "You mean this cauldron? It's Xiao Xian's." When he heard that it was Xiao Xian's, Zheng Luo's expression stiffened. His questioning expression softened. He was about to reprimand Duo Kong for not advising Xiao Xian to exchange for the cauldron when Duo Kong briefly explained the situation. After hearing this, Zheng Luo put away his dissatisfaction and stroked his beard. He smiled and said, "Since it's a gift, just accept it." Who wouldn't accept something that was delivered to their doorstep? As the chief of the tribe, Zheng Luo obviously thought of more things. To the slave masters, this cauldron was not something that could be casually given away. He could already guess An Yan's expression now. They went for wool and came home shorn. They deserved it. They deserved it for showing off. When he heard that Duo Kong was working with Black Bear, Zheng Luo smiled even harder. He said, "Good. Good. Good." Zheng Luo, who was in a good mood, called Xiao Xian up the mountain and gave him some linen in silk fabrics. "While you were out, another team from the tribe went to trade with other tribesmen. I have a lot here, take some with you." Although ramie and other textile materials were rough, they were cheap and easy to obtain. Everyone used them more, but silk fabrics were rarely used. The slave masters really liked those glossy and smooth fabrics. After giving Xiao Xian some linen and silk fabrics, Zheng Luo asked Xiao Xian about the trade. Duo Kong only gave a brief explanation. He wanted to know more about the details. When he finished, Zheng Luo looked at the cauldron he brought back. Cloud pattern flat cauldron. It should be made by the Xia people, Zheng Luo said. Xia people? Xiao Xian didn't know much about this. Yes, it used to be the Xia tribe. The Xia people were good at casting. After the tribe split up, the Xia people used Gongjia as their surname and made a living by casting. Many cauldrons in Amba City were made by them. The Xia people's style is mainly round cauldrons and cloud patterns. In recent years, they have more flat cauldrons. The 6 tribes are now casting cauldrons. Most of them are round cauldrons, followed by square cauldrons, and flat cauldrons are the least common. More than half of the round cauldrons and flat cauldrons are made by the Xia people. Plus, the Xia people like cloud patterns and not beast patterns, so this cauldron should be made by the Xia people. But I don't know why this cauldron failed. Zheng Luo looked at the flat body of the cauldron and then at its feet, puzzled. Since he couldn't figure it out, Zheng Luo stopped thinking about it. He said to Xiao Xian, "You can decide on this cauldron. You can melt it or keep it for your own soup." Xiao Xian carried the cauldron out of Zheng Luo's place. When he returned home, he put the cauldron in his stone crafting room. It was big enough and spacious enough for him to study the patterns on the cauldron. The words on the cauldron were a little cryptic and ancient. If it were anyone else, they probably wouldn't be able to read or understand, but Xiao Xian could still understand some of it. The usage of the language here had more or less changed after 1,000 years. There were some differences in the usage of words and grammar. What Xiao Xian learned from the people in the desert was actually the usage of the language here from 1,000 years ago. It was closer to the ancient method on the cauldron. Xiao Xian wrote all the words on the body of the cauldron on a piece of cloth for later study. But when Xiao Xian finished writing those words and looked at the cauldron standing there crookedly, he felt that the patterns on the body of the cauldron were a little strange. It was like a whirlpool, attracting people's attention. Chapter 398. Many people thought that the decorative patterns on the cups and other objects were purely for the sake of looking good or acting as a symbol. Xiao Xian used to think so too, but the more he came into contact with these things, the more Xiao Xian found that there were many mysterious things in them. Just like the cauldron in front of him. Xiao Xian thought that what was displayed on the cauldron was all about the achievements of a slave owner in Amba City or other heroic deeds or records of some memorable things. But when he carefully observed it, he found that there were many things that he could not understand. Yes, just these words did contain some of the glorious history of Amba City. Although there were a few words that Xiao Xian could not understand, it did not affect his understanding of those words. They were words of praise for the ancient Amba tribe, as well as a few congratulatory words. If it was just these, it would be fine, but the cloud patterns on the cauldron that seemed to act as decoration or background always gave Xiao Xian a very strange feeling. Many tribes liked this kind of cloud pattern. The Hui tribe that he came into contact with also liked to use cloud patterns. Probably because these vortex-shaped cloud patterns could not only be used as decoration and filling, but also had a sense of complexity and mystery in the structure. They were free and had a variety of styles. This cloud pattern flat-footed cauldron had a more delicate and complex cloud pattern on the upper end. Each cloud pattern vortex rolled towards the center, some like rolling clouds, some like flowing clouds. What was composed of many cloud patterns was not a simple two-sided structure that repeatedly overlapped up and down, but was combined in a more natural way. It was much more complex than the cloud pattern used by the Hui tribe. It was also the most complex but most natural cloud pattern Xiao Xian had ever seen. At first glance, the pattern was quite beautiful. Although it was not as attractive as the larger characters on the body of the cauldron, as long as one saw the cloud pattern, they would be attracted to it. It was an indescribable visual impact. As decorations, their purpose had been achieved, but was that really all? Xiao Xian stared at the patterns on the body of the cauldron for a while. He wanted to copy the complex and dense cloud patterns, but there was no paper around. Using cloth was too extravagant. Xiao Xian got up and went out to find some wide and long leaves. He then painted some paint on the cloud patterns on the body of the cauldron and used the leaves to print the patterns on the leaves. After that, Xiao Xian copied the cloud patterns on a piece of cloth. Not only were there cloud patterns on the body of the cauldron, but there were also cloud patterns on the 3 flat legs of the cauldron. However, unlike the fine and complicated cloud patterns on the body of the cauldron, the cloud patterns on the flat legs were much thicker and more concise. Xiao Xian also imprinted the cloud patterns on the flat feet one by one and studied them slowly. Zheng Luo said that the cauldron was made by the Xia people. The Xia people liked to use cloud patterns. According to what Xiao Xian knew, cloud patterns were one of the earliest patterns. It seemed that every tribe that used cloud patterns had a very long history. Yanjiao's flame patterns were also created early. However, in terms of usage, they were not as widespread as the cloud patterns. Because the cloud patterns were balanced, there was a sense of movement and harmony. When 2 sides overlapped, the patterns would not appear abrupt. However, the cloud patterns on the cauldron made by the Xia people seemed to contain more. Since there was nothing else to do and it was almost winter, Xiao Xian would have more free time to study these. After copying all the cloud patterns on the body of the cauldron onto 2 pieces of cloth, Xiao Xian went to the shamaness to ask about some older languages. However, the shamaness did not know much. She could only read about things from hundreds of years ago from the records of her ancestors. However, most of the records passed down by Yanjiao's ancestors were written by the shamaness. Most of the language used was also from the other side and not the local language. Since he could not get the help he wanted from the shamaness, Xiao Xian could only think about it on his own. Thinking about these cloud patterns, Xiao Xian felt as if he had returned to the time when he was studying the conclusion. Everything in the world was full of order and rules. Whether it was the wild beasts in the forest or the people in various places, the physiological functions of the body also operated normally because of order. A person's sense of hearing, smell, and other bodily functions acted on the brain for a long time. It had a subtle influence on people's creations, which led to the creation of various arts and skills. This sense of order was also fully reflected in the symbols and patterns created. For example, the cloud patterns that Xiao Xian was looking at now. There were many, but not messy. The person who created such a complicated and natural cloud pattern must have pursued a sense of balance and order in his creation. Only in this way could the cloud patterns on the body of the cauldron be produced. Then, under order, what did such a complicated combination of cloud patterns represent? Xiao Xian stared at the cloud patterns for a day but could not figure out anything. After thinking about it, Xiao Xian went to the forest to pick up some leaves. The leaves that fell on the ground had already turned yellow, but they had not withered. The leaves were wider, and each one was larger than an adult's palm. They were also thicker. After picking up the leaves, he dried them under the sun and stored them for later use. At the same time, Xiao Xian also made a square sand table. The sand table was not deep, about 1 square meter in size. Xiao Xian picked up a branch and drew on the sand table. The combination of the complex cloud patterns seemed too difficult. Xiao Xian tried to divide the cloud patterns into several pieces and draw them on the sand table. Every time he separated a cloud pattern, he would draw a single cloud pattern on a leaf. After spending 5 days, Xiao Xian finished disassembling the cloud patterns on the cauldron. It was only a preliminary disassembly. He did not know if it was correct or not. Because there was no comparison, no one could tell Xiao Xian whether it was correct or not. Art existed in exaggeration and rendering, and the artistry of the pattern made it much more difficult for Xiao Xian to disassemble it. After thinking for 5 days, in addition to eating, drinking, and going to the toilet, all the time was spent on disassembling. When he finally finished drawing the last cloud pattern, Xiao Xian was tired. With dark circles under his eyes, he ate a large pot of mountain fruit and meat soup. After a good sleep, he walked out of the house. Although the Yangguang outside was not as bright as before, for Xiao Xian, who had been cooped up in the house for 5 days, it was a bit dazzling. After recovering from his trance, Xiao Xian planned to go to other places at the foot of the mountain to relax. It was not necessarily beneficial to be tense all the time. Maybe he could get some inspiration by walking around. Recently, the temperature had dropped sharply. Almost every day, the temperature difference from the day before could be felt. Looking into the distance from the mountain, a lot of yellowed trees could be seen 5 days ago, but now they were much thinner. Recently, the people who went out to trade had all returned. Not only did Duokong bring people to trade in Amba City, but there were also people who went to other tribes to trade, silk fabrics, and other things. Some of the hunted meat was hanging outside to dry. Walking down the road, Xiao Xian saw many beast heads and legs hanging in front of every house. Seeing a familiar figure, Xiao Xian shouted, "Zhao Ming, what are you doing?" Zhao Ming, who was carrying fruit into the house, looked in Xiao Xian's direction and said happily, "Xiao Xian. Elder." Xiao Xian looked at the fruits wrapped in big leaves. These were all kinds of fruits that were rarely eaten in the tribe. He asked, "What are these for?" "To make soup." Some fruits were not eaten directly. The tribesmen used them as seasonings to make soup. "No, these are for the tapers." Speaking of this, Zhao Ming's face was red. Xiao Xian remembered that he brought back a nest of tapers from hunting. Both the big ones and the small ones were brought back in a net bag for Zhao Ming to raise. "Where's your brother?" "Not at home." Xiao Xian scanned the house and did not see any adults. He went to chop wood with the others. Zhao Ming brought Xiao Xian to see the tapers he raised. The little tapers were bigger than when Xiao Xian brought them back. Their fur had grown thicker. The colder the weather, the more fur these tapers would have to protect them from the cold. When they saw Xiao Xian come over, they all squeezed towards the mother model. The big ones and the small ones all nested in the corner with branches and dried grass. "They're quite energetic. You raised them well. You can eat them when they're a little bigger." Xiao Xian looked at the tapers and said. Xiaobi's mother said that these tapers will grow faster after winter. They don't eat much in winter, so they grow slower. Zhao Ming thought of something and said happily to Xiao Xian, "But when they grow up, I won't eat them anymore." "Why?" Xiao Xian was confused. Didn't these little kids always drool when they saw the wild animals in captivity? Why wouldn't they eat them? Zhao Ming smiled, showing his white teeth. He did not speak, but faint patterns appeared on his face. The patterns were gradually deepening. It was not as fast as Xiao Xian's, but it was definitely deepening steadily. Totemic patterns? Xiao Xian was shocked, then smiled, "Congratulations, you're about to become a totemic warrior." Although he had heard about it from others, it was Xiao Xian's first time seeing a tribesman who did not awaken during the ceremony. Perhaps this was the difference brought by the disappearance of the fire seed. The fire seed had been integrated into every Yanjiao's bloodline. As long as they reached the boundary of awakening, the fire seed in their bloodline could help them awaken at any time. There was no need to wait for the ceremony. As for why Zhao Ming said he would not eat tapers, of course, it was because once he became a totemic warrior, he could eat higher-level beasts, such as fearsome beasts. Even if he could not eat them, he could exchange them for other things. It was not a loss. After walking around the foot of the mountain, Xiao Xian was called up by Guang Yi, who was carrying a large bundle of firewood. Before this, Xiao Xian did not go out. He looked like he was busy with something, so no one bothered him. Now that Xiao Xian had come out, they called him up the mountain to talk. After spending so much time together, Guang Yi, who had face blindness, finally had an impression of Xiao Xian. Although Xiao Xian's face was still blurry, he could recognize Xiao Xian just by looking at the bone ornaments Xiao Xian wore. Winter is coming. The shamaness said it will start snowing in 3 days. The chief has been discussing the winter hunt for the past 2 days, Guang Yi said to Xiao Xian. Usually, when winter started, there would not be heavy snow. The tribe would organize a hunt, and when it started snowing, they would not go out. After going up the mountain, Duo Kong asked Xiao Xian if he wanted to go for the winter hunt. The winter hunt had its dangers. Not everyone was suited for it. I'll go, Xiao Xian said. He wanted to use this opportunity to hunt a better prey to make a ceremonial animal robe for the ceremony. Winter here was not long. After the end of winter, there would be the most important ceremony of the year. This was also the first ceremony Xiao Xian attended since he came here. Chapter 399. After the snowfall, the forest was covered with a layer of white. Xiao Xian went out to hunt with the hunting team. Most of the beasts were thick-skinned but hairless. They rarely came out in the winter, so most of the beasts they hunted were hairy, which could be made into fur coats. Because of the participation of Xiao Xian, the elder, many people participated in the winter hunt. Everyone was very enthusiastic. In addition to hunting, Xiao Xian also went to the dry riverbed to fish some stones back. When he was free, he would make some glowing crystals for everyone to use. The winter night would be darker, so the crystals would make it easier for everyone to move around. During the winter hunt, Xiao Xian hunted a hairy giant beast, which he used as a sacrificial animal clothing. When the snowfall in the forest increased, the people in the tribe stopped going out. The river around the tribe was also frozen, so there was no need to build a bridge. They could walk directly on the river. The children in the tribe liked to play on the river. For the people in the tribe, winter meant boredom. Every day, they would gather in groups of 3 to 5 to exercise their muscles and bones, and teach the new warriors. Since they couldn't go out to hunt, they could only use other ways to vent their energy. Xiao Xian spent most of his time in the house studying the cloud patterns. Occasionally, he would come out for some exercise, and then he would study again. Sometimes, he would ask the craftsmen in the tribe for advice. Their craftsmanship came from their ancestors, who learned it from them, and then summed up their own experience and passed it down from generation to generation. They had a good understanding of the casting and forging styles of each faction, and had a lot of contact with the works of the Xia people. However, the craftsmen in the tribe didn't know much about the cloud patterns that Xiao Xian asked about. The craftsmen did give Xiao Xian some handwritten notes from their ancestors. Because the craftsmen sorted them out by themselves, they were messier than the ones left by the shaman. Some of them were missing parts, or they weren't clear. Xiao Xian could barely read them. In order to express his gratitude, Xiao Xian gave them a few glowing water sun stones, which made the craftsmen very happy. He spent the winter studying cloud patterns and making water sun stones. When Xiao Xian heard the cheers outside, he realized that winter had already passed. Winter came late here, and the days where they couldn't hunt weren't long. This made Xiao Xian unable to react when he heard the noise outside. It's over so quickly. Xiao Xian stood up and shook the leaves off his body. He pushed the door open and walked out. Because of Xiao Xian, some families in the tribe also used the water sun stone. Even on a moonless night, other than the light from the fire, some sparkling lights could be seen. And now, the 2 crescent moons that had disappeared in the sky had reappeared. From now on, the sky would be illuminated by them for the next year. The moon came out and winter was over. The most important thing for the tribe was to offer sacrifices. They were in different places, but the time was synchronized. There was no such thing as day on one side and night on the other. No matter which Yanjiao tribe it was, they all used the moon in the sky as a reference. It was just that they didn't know if the exact time was the same. The shamaness finalized the time and announced it. The tribe began to get busy preparing for the sacrifice. Xiao Xian was the only elder of the two tribes. His position was second only to the shamaness and the chief. Of course, he had a lot of weight in the sacrifice. In the past year, the awakened warriors would sit closer to the front during the sacrifice. Because from today onwards, they would officially become part of the tribe's combat power. Even if they couldn't start hunting immediately and needed to go through a period of adaptation and training, they should have the awareness to become strong. They couldn't continue to play around like children all day long. When night fell, all the tribe members gathered. The fire in the fire pit had been lit by the shamaness. Xiao Xian, the shamaness and the chief stood closest to the fire pit. Looking at the fire in the fire pit, as the shamaness chanted, Xiao Xian suddenly had a feeling that there was also a fire on the other side far away. He couldn't help but look in that direction. Far away on the other side of the sea, in the old haunt of the fearsome beast mountain forest, it should also be the day of the sacrifice. There was no communication, but their hearts were connected. The shamaness originally wondered if the ancestral bone ornaments would appear again in today's sacrifice. But as she chanted, she found that the fire in the fire pit was especially active today. It was even more vigorous than the day they welcomed Xiao Xian. What was going on? The shamaness shared some of her attention and focused on the fire pit. Since the fire seed disappeared, the fire pit had only changed greatly twice. The first time was when they welcomed Xiao Xian last year, and the second time was now. Whoosh, the fire rose without wind. It was like a giant beast waking up from hibernation, waving its sharp claws and roaring. The fire rolled up, and the totem of the two horns appeared clearly. This time, it was much clearer than last year's ceremony to welcome Xiao Xian. This change also surprised the tribesmen who were paying attention to the fire pit. They had never seen such a change before. But Xiao Xian had seen it before, and more than once. The first of the three flames of the fire pit, soaring flame. As if to confirm Xiao Xian's guess, soon, the fire in the fire pit rose up in an instant. At the same time, many flames flew out from the fire pit. The fire was fainter than the one in Xiao Xian's memory. It was not so much a flame, but a reflection of the flame. Looking at the sparks in the fire pit and the flames flying out one after another, the tribesmen were stunned and didn't know what to do. The shamaness looked at the scene in front of her and murmured. At this time, she had a guess. She suddenly turned her eyes to Xiao Xian, wanting to get an answer from Xiao Xian. The second flame of the fire pit, soaring flame. Xiao Xian whispered. Synchronized. The fire pits on both sides were synchronized. Even across the sea, even though the situation on both sides was different, at this moment, at tonight's ceremony, the fire pits on both sides were synchronized. On the 4 bone ornaments worn by Xiao Xian, the crimson beads emitted flames. Like last time, the eruption of flames wrapped around the surroundings and then formed a flame giant that rose from the ground. Because of the previous experience, everyone was a bit calmer this time. They were only shocked by the floating flames that looked like shadows. This was the first time in their lives that they had seen it. It was strange, but there was an inexplicable sense of intimacy in the bottom of their hearts. The tall flame giant slowly turned around and looked in one direction, which was also the direction Xiao Xian was looking at before. At the same time, in another place far away, in the ferocious beast mountain forest. The Yanjiao tribesmen at tonight's ceremony were worried about Xiao Xian, who had disappeared for a long time. Since Xiao Xian's disappearance in the desert, the shamaness had sent people to investigate. It took a lot of effort to find out that Xiao Xian had been hunted down and jumped into the sea. He hadn't been seen since then. Because of this, the Yinjiao tribe had almost started a war in the desert. But later, everyone was called back by the shamaness. Xian is still alive. The shamaness held the box containing the elder's bone ornaments and told everyone with certainty. Tonight, many people thought of Xiao Xian, but they didn't expect a flame giant to suddenly appear in the fire pit. If Xiao Xian was here, the flame giant would have calmed them down. But now, Xiao Xian wasn't here. The flame giant that appeared didn't have any other reaction because of the kneeling crowd. The huge figure formed by the flame slowly turned in one direction. The shamaness looked at the light emitted from the box containing the elder's bone ornaments and was so excited that her hands trembled, almost shaking the ornaments out of the box. He found them. Xian must have found them. The others didn't understand what the shamaness meant. They only knew that Xiao Xian was still alive. That was enough. When will he return? The shamaness asked in a trembling voice. The others thought that she was talking about Xiao Xian, but Chief Ao knew that she wasn't talking about just Xiao Xian. After the sacrificial ceremony, no matter which branch they were from, their hearts were not at peace. The Yinjiao people in Fearsome Beast Forest were wondering when Xiao Xian would return. The shamaness and Chief Ao were wondering if Xiao Xian had really found the other Yinjiao people. On the other side of the sea, everyone was wondering what the flame giant was looking at and what the ancestor was trying to convey. Some people guessed the reason and couldn't sleep that night. Chief Sheng Luo sent a team with Xiao Xian to the shore where Xiao Xian had come ashore to see if there was a passage under the sea. But they returned in disappointment. Xiao Xian didn't even see the passage that he had come from, let alone a safe passage. They probably didn't meet at the right time. Even if they did, Xiao Xian felt that other than himself, there might not be many people who could safely pass through there. It was impossible not to be disappointed. Even though this place had a rich culture and they could live well here, Xiao Xian still wanted to go back and take the Yinjiao people with him. Building a ship. With their current technology, they might not be able to build a ship that could support such a long journey. There were also many giant beasts in the sea. One tail could overturn them all. The danger was no less than the passage under the sea. After thinking about it, Xiao Xian felt that if the bridge under the sea could be raised, then everyone could go from one continent to another just like they did 1,000 years ago. Unfortunately, he didn't have the ability. Forget it, he would wait for another chance. Or maybe he would find another way. By the time they returned to the tribe from the shore, the weather was already warm. Some people had already started to try planting in the small fields of the tribe. Even if they didn't plant much, as long as they could produce something to relieve the pressure of food, it was worth it. Besides, the shamaness had told everyone that hunting was important, but so was planting. This skill could not be neglected. There was still some time before the next hunt. Looking at the people working in the fields, Xiao Xian asked some experienced growers some questions. He remembered that he still had some things in his hands. Xiao Xian still had some of the 1,000 gold grains that he and Ji Ju had stolen from the rats. He had thought about planting them when he brought them back, but it was already the end of the year and he had other things to do. Xiao Xian didn't think about it anymore. He took out the bag of grains. These grains had been dried by Xiao Xian. They didn't look as bright as before, and the husks were a little dark. Looking at these dark golden grains, Xiao Xian put them away and took them to find experienced growers. In this climate, they should be able to try planting, right? Chapter 400. The weather was getting warmer and the air was humid. But when the sun came out, the humid air was gone. Xiao Xian took the small bag of grains down the mountain and went to the tribe's farmland to discuss it with someone. A few days ago, he asked an elder in the tribe who was good at farming. He planned to bring the grains to the elder today and ask for his opinion and suggestions. Xiao Xian knew about farming. But after coming to this world, He didn't recognize most of the plants because they didn't even exist in the other world. Not only that, but after coming to this world, Xiao Xian was blind again. Although he knew some, the main crops here were different from what Xiao Xian knew. Their growth habits were also very different. Xiao Xian could only ask someone who was more experienced. Most of the tribe's farmland was at the foot of the mountain. From the mountainside to the foot of the mountain, there were plots of land. Each plot was planted by several families. As for how the land was distributed after planting, the tribe didn't care. Xiao Xian came to a plot of land near the foot of the mountain. An old woman with a head of silver hair was sitting there. Her name was Chi Chi. Her mother was from the Taihe tribe. The Taihe tribe was better at farming than the Yanjiao tribe. They had a better grasp of many techniques, so Chi Chi knew more about farming. The people who worked in the fields often came to ask her questions. "You're here." Chi Chi saw Xiao Xian and quickly stood up. In many tribes, people had to pay their respects to people of high status. Yanjiao also had this kind of etiquette on important occasions. But it was usually more casual. Chi Chi obviously still felt that she had to bow to Xiao Xian. But as soon as she stood up, Xiao Xian stopped her. Xiao Xian didn't say much. He took out the bag and poured out a few grains. "Take a look at this." Chi Chi's attention immediately shifted to the dark gold grains in Xiao Xian's hand. These were grains that she had never seen before. After taking a closer look, Chi Chi shook her head. "This is the first time I've seen such a grain." "Is this the 1,000-grain gold you mentioned?" "Yes, that's it." Xiao Xian had told Chi Chi where he found the 1,000-grain gold. After some consideration, Chi Chi suggested that Xiao Xian find a place similar to where he found it. That way, it would be safer. No one knew what kind of environment this plant liked to grow in. There were all kinds of plants. Some liked the sun, some liked the shade, some liked the humidity, and some liked the drought. They couldn't be lumped together. "However, Elder, you can plant some in every place. When the time comes and you see which place has the best growth, you can plant them there." Thinking about how Xiao Xian said that these grains were extremely rare and precious, Chi Chi paused. Since it was rare and precious, how could she waste it like she did with other seeds? But looking at the dark gold grains in Xiao Xian's hand, Chi Chi's heart itched. She wanted to try planting these rare grains. As someone who had been farming since young, these few grains were very attractive. Even if she hadn't eaten them before, she could give a rough evaluation just by looking at them and smelling them. They were very attractive. But Xiao Xian was an elder and these grains were very precious. She couldn't ask for them. Sensing Chi Chi's gaze, Xiao Xian thought about the 1,000 grains in his hand and counted 100 for her. "If you have time, can you help me plant these?" For someone as experienced as Chi Chi, it would save Xiao Xian a lot of trouble. It was better than Xiao Xian messing around. Chi Chi hurriedly promised, Of course, of course. Don't worry, Elder, I will do my best." As she spoke, she took out a cloth bag and carefully took the 100 grains from Xiao Xian. She decided to discuss this with her fellow farmers first. They would carry out their plan after they came up with a plan. If she succeeded, she would definitely get more benefits from Xiao Xian. But to Chi Chi, the most important thing was that she could try planting something so rare. This would give her a sense of achievement. After giving the grains to Chi Chi, Xiao Xian looked at the people working in the field. Everyone used many types of farming tools, such as plowing, watering, harvesting, threshing, etc. Many of them learned from the slave masters in the 6 tribes. They were very useful in plowing, planting, processing, etc. These tools were mostly made of wood and stone. It was said that the slave masters used bronze tools. But in the tribe, no one could bear to use bronze tools. Stones and animal bones were also good substitutes. After looking at them for a while, Xiao Xian went back to find some materials and improved the tools. He even made a plow for them to cultivate the land. Xiao Xian's plow was simpler than what he had planned because of the limited tools. It was also made of wood and stone. After a few attempts, he improved and perfected the plow to make it lighter and easier to turn around. It was easy to operate and its flexibility was satisfactory. This way, the efficiency of farming would also increase. After making it, Xiao Xian went to show it to the farmers and taught them how to use it. Perhaps the slave masters already had similar farming tools, but this was the first time the people in the tribe had seen it. They felt it was new and very happy. As soon as Xiao Xian brought the plow over, everyone surrounded it. "Elder, what is this? Can this be used for farming?" Everyone was curious. The plow was a farming tool. Usually, it was tied to the animal that pulled it, such as a cow. But there were no domesticated animals here, so it could only be pulled by humans. Luckily, the Yinjiao tribe had a lot of manpower, so it was easy for them to use it. "That's it. Use it to break up the soil and make trenches." I saw that everyone was busy preparing for the planting of seeds. This plow should make it easier for everyone. After the demonstration, Xiao Xian gave the plow to the others to try it out. Many people wanted to try it, but it was snatched away by Qi Qi's granddaughter. Ji Ling was only 15 or 16 years old. She was as beautiful as a flower and had already awakened her totemic power. She had just returned from a hunt a few days ago, so it wasn't her turn to patrol. She had nothing to do, so she came to help Qi Qi. She didn't expect to see Xiao Xian with the plow. She rolled up her sleeves and squeezed the others to the side. She copied Xiao Xian and started to plow. Another middle-aged woman helped from behind. Ji Ling stopped when she came across a rock in the ground. She didn't use a knife. Instead, she reached out and dug out a rock the size of winter. She didn't even look at it. With a toss, she threw the rock far away. Xiao Xian saw the rock the size of a winter melon draw an arc in the sky. It flew over the river in front of the tribe and landed in the forest far away, startling a few birds. He turned his head and looked at the field again. Ji Ling was pulling the plow while sharing the feeling of pulling the plow with a few hunting companions who were rubbing their palms together. Xiao Xian was speechless. In the tribe, women were like men, and men were like ferocious beasts. Those who worked in the fields weren't all people who hadn't awakened their totemic power. Most of the time, totemic warriors were the ones who did the hard work. After all, they didn't have hunting shifts every day. Girls like Ji Ling, who Xiao Xian thought looked like a flower, also worked in the fields like the others. In the tribe, there were two kinds of people. One was the weak group who hadn't awakened their totemic power, and the other was the warriors who had awakened their totemic power. At this time, many people were busy sowing seeds. Xiao Xian didn't know until now that other than the fields and the tribe, there were also people who were planting seeds in the forest on the other side of the river. However, unlike the meticulous planting in the tribe, they were more casual in the forest, and still used the primitive method of burning sticks. First, cut down the weeds, vines, and bushes in the forest, and then set fire to them. After the rain, when the soil was wet and soft, they did not plow or dig. Instead, they planted some seeds, and the burned vegetation became fertilizer for these seeds. When sowing seeds, the people in the front poked holes in the ground with spears or other tools, and the people behind would put the seeds into the holes. After planting, they didn't take much care of it. Sometimes, they would go over to take a look, or chase away the birds and beasts. After all, their main source of food was hunting, followed by the fields in the tribe. As for the fields outside the tribe, they were just there to pass time. As long as they harvested more than what they sowed, they would be satisfied. After harvesting what they planted, they would move to another place, and the original plot of land would be idle. They would wait for a few years, or even longer, before moving back to plant again. There was a lot of land here, and the forest was big, so they could afford it. Xiao Xian didn't plant the seeds in the fields, nor did he go outside the tribe. He used a wooden fence to enclose a 70 square meters of empty land behind the house. After doing some preliminary work, he planted 100 grains. The 1,000-grain gold was discovered on the top of the mountain. Xiao Xian lived on the top of the mountain, not far from the top. Although the mountain wasn't high, Xiao Xian didn't feel safe planting it on other mountains. After all, there were too many birds and beasts on other mountains, and Xiao Xian couldn't keep an eye on them all the time. Different mountains had different climates and geology, but Xiao Xian didn't think too much about it. He just wanted to try it out. Speaking of which, he wasn't very interested in planting the 1,000-grain gold, and wasn't obsessed with it. It would be good if he could plant it, but if he couldn't, he would just cook the remaining grains and eat them. After so long, he should still be able to eat them. After a while, the seeds behind Xiao Xian's house sprouted. Out of 100 seeds, more than half of them had sprouted. Xiao Xian was very satisfied with this. But when Xiao Xian was called over by Qi Qi, he realized that most of the grains had already sprouted 2 to 3 leaves. With 100 grains, the survival rate was more than 90%. It was much better than the ones in Xiao Xian's backyard. She was indeed experienced. Seeing the seedlings, Xiao Xian was happy too. It didn't matter who planted them, as long as they were alive. Qi Qi and the rest were even more excited to see the seedlings. Every day, when they had time, they would go and look at the seedlings. They found spots from the top to the bottom of the mountain, and planted 10 grains in each spot. At this stage, the seedlings at the bottom of the mountain were growing the best. Chapter 401. On this day, Xiao Xian came back from a hunt and heard that the Taihe tribe was there. Although there were occasional conflicts between the two tribes, there were still interactions between them. After the trade trip at the end of last year, the relationship between the two tribes improved. They hadn't quarreled since then, at least the leaders of the two tribes didn't quarrel. Why are the Taihe people here? Xiao Xian asked the person beside him. I heard it's about farming. They're at the field. The person who spoke was obviously unhappy. The Taihe tribesmen were better at farming than the Flaming Horns. Everyone had to admit that the Taihe tribesmen could not only grow crops, but also herbs. Every year, many of the herbs they brought to trade were actually grown by themselves. The Taihe tribesmen had a much larger area of land. Unlike the Flaming Horns, the Taihe tribesmen placed a lot of importance on farming. As for why the Taihe tribesmen came to visit the Flaming Horn tribe's fields, it was because the Taihe tribesmen had a sense of superiority when it came to farming. Every time they came, they would act arrogantly as if they were teaching the Flaming Horn tribe. This was the reason why there were so many small-scale arguments. But from the tribe's point of view, the shamans were happy to see this kind of academic exchange. Although there were arguments, it was worth it if the Yanjiao people could learn more. Thinking about the 1,000-grain gold that Qi Qi planted, Xiao Xian put down his prey and walked towards the field. Xiao Xian didn't ask Qi Qi to keep the 1,000-grain gold a secret. Qi Qi even asked Xiao Xian if they should hide it if the Taihe people came. Xiao Xian refused. It would be better if he could get some useful advice from the Taihe people. He didn't have to worry about the Taihe people playing dirty. At least until now, the Taihe people hadn't done anything like that. After asking around, Xiao Xian went to a place near the mountainside. There were already many people there. Xiao Xian remembered that there was also a piece of land there that was used to plant the 1,000-grain gold. Qi Qi was in a good mood today. In the past, when people from the Taihe tribe came, they would always give them some pointers. Their choice of words wasn't too tactful and they took pleasure in attacking them. It wasn't easy for them to find a way to attack the Yanjiao people, so they naturally wouldn't hold back. But today was different. Even though the Taiha people caught some mistakes, the incident with Li and the 1,000 grain gold distracted them. When Xiao Xian walked over, 2 Taiha tribesmen were discussing something around a plow. The others were with Chi Chi, standing beside a specially fenced field. There were only a few seedlings in the field. As for the people around the fence, their eyes were shining as they looked at the seedlings. Seeing Xiao Xian walk over, Chi Chi bowed as usual and introduced the people from the Taiha tribe. After being ridiculed so many times, Chi Chi wanted to return the favor. When she introduced them, her expression seemed to be saying, "Look at these bumpkins, they haven't even seen a plow before." After being ridiculed by Chi Chi, the Taiha tribesmen's expressions froze. It was rare that they didn't retort back. Instead, they quickly put on a smile, as if they were close relatives. One of them coughed and walked forward. "Quan Bai from the Taiha tribe is here to make a deal with Elder Xiao Xian." At the end of last year, they had already heard about the glowing crystals from their trading team. They had sent people to probe the flaming horns a few times, but the flaming horns kept their mouths shut. They couldn't find out anything useful at all. This time, the chief had the intention of letting them trade with the flaming horns. They wanted to exchange some glowing crystals for them to take a look. Originally, they thought that if Xiao Xian wasn't here, they would look for someone else. The other Yanjiao tribesmen also had glowing crystals. They didn't expect to run into the Yanjiao hunting team today. "You want the water sun stone?" "Of course," Xiao Xian said. "But what do you want in exchange?" "What does Elder Xiao Xian want?" Quan Bai asked. Usually, in a trade between 2 tribes, bronze wares were rarely exchanged. Most of the time, animal hides or other items were used. Taiha tribe had more herbs. Quan Bai thought that Xiao Xian would directly ask for precious herbs. But after thinking for a while, Xiao Xian said, "How are the craftsmen of the Taiha tribe?" Quan Bai frowned. He didn't understand why Xiao Xian would suddenly ask this. Did he think that the craftsmen of the Yanjiao tribe weren't good enough and wanted to ask the craftsmen of the Taiha tribe to make bronze wares? In terms of craftsmen, the Taiha tribe was quite good. Thinking about this, Quan Bai said proudly, "The craftsmen of my tribe are naturally very skilled. Although they aren't as good as the masters of the 6 tribes, they are still better than." Quan Bai was about to say, "better than Yanjiao," when he saw Xiao Xian look over. He remembered that he had something to ask of him, so he changed the topic and looked at the other tribes with disdain. "But they are still much better than the Fox tribe and the other tribes." As for how many tribes were included in the word "other," he didn't say. Xiao Xian nodded and asked, "The Taiha tribe has passed down their craftsmen for thousands of years, right?" Quan Bai's heart skipped a beat. Was this kid trying to steal their craftsmen? No way. Quan Bai was cautious, but he didn't show it on his face. He only said, "Before Yanjiao came here, the Taiha tribe had already made our own tools. But compared to the people of the 6 tribes, we are still far behind. Can I talk to the craftsmen of your tribe? I have some questions." Quan Bai and the other Taiha tribesmen were on guard. Xiao Xian said, "Don't worry, I'm not asking about craftsmen. I'm asking about other things." Quan Bai and the others relaxed when they heard that he wasn't asking about craftsmen. But they were still on guard. Some things could be brought out for discussion, but other things should be kept in their hands. For example, they would never tell anyone about the cultivation methods of their tribe's precious herbs. Craftsmen were one of them. They could process it, but they wouldn't reveal anything about it. Seeing that Xiao Xian only wanted to talk to the craftsmen, the matter of the glowing crystals was settled. They could go back and report to the chief. But Quan Bai and the others glanced at the few seedlings inside the fence. One of them poked Quan Bai's back, signaling for him to bring it up. Quan Bai thought for a moment and said to Xiao Xian, "Elder Xiao Xian, do you have any more 1,000 grain gold?" Xiao Xian glanced at them. "What? Do you want it?" If you do, we would like to trade with Elder Xiao Xian. Quan Bai's eyes were filled with anticipation. Quan Bai had even pinched an inconspicuous part of the seedling when Chi wasn't paying attention. Then, he sniffed it and tasted it. His eyes widened, but he suppressed the desire in his heart and tried his best to calm down and negotiate. Sure, I'll make a decision after I talk to your craftsman. Xiao Xian said. He wanted to talk to them before making a decision. Quan Bai and the others panicked. Who knew how long this would take? If they missed the best time to plant the seeds, it would be a huge failure. They would be letting these people down. But Xiao Xian had made up his mind. He couldn't change it. They knew that Xiao Xian was forcing them to arrange an exchange with the craftsman, but they had no choice but to follow. The Taiha tribesmen wanted to drag this out, but after a discussion, they arranged for an experienced craftsman to talk to Xiao Xian. Not only was this craftsman better than others in terms of skill, he also had to be smart. If he was a little stupid, he might accidentally let Xiao Xian use all his skills. Then it would be too late to cry. The craftsman had also done his best. He was extremely alert when he met with Xiao Xian. He was thinking about how to avoid the flaming horn elder if he brought up the matter of forging. What he didn't expect was that Xiao Xian didn't ask about the craftsmanship but about the Xia people. Since it wasn't about forging, the craftsman relaxed and told him what he knew. As for the cloud pattern Xiao Xian mentioned, the craftsman didn't know much about it. Thinking of something, the craftsman said, I remember that in the records left by my ancestors, there was something about the Xia people's cloud pattern. Xiao Xian was disappointed but perked up when he heard this. Your ancestors studied the Xia people's cloud pattern. The craftsman nodded. It seems so. But after they passed away, no one paid attention to the Xia people's cloud pattern. In fact, the craftsmen of the Taiha tribe wanted to imitate the Xia people's products because they could sell for a high price. The Xia people's most typical cloud pattern was the complicated cloud pattern. But when it came to forging, they realized that the seemingly simple cloud pattern was extremely difficult to imitate. Just a little bit would result in a much worse product. Anyone with a discerning eye could tell that it was fake. The craftsmen studied for their entire lives but couldn't figure it out completely. But they did find some clues and wrote down their findings in the notes they left for their descendants. But the descendants of the Taiha tribe weren't interested in imitating other people's products. Gradually, they stopped paying attention to it and only glanced at the notes occasionally. To the Taiha people, the Xia people's cloud pattern belonged to other people and not their tribe, so it wasn't classified as a secret. These were items that could be traded. However, the notes couldn't be given out so easily. The craftsman promised to go back and sort out the notes and write a copy for Xiao Xian. When Xiao Xian saw the notes, he was overjoyed and gave him 3 glowing crystals. This was something that the Taiha tribe had already discussed. They even felt that they were getting a good deal. As for the 1,000-grain gold that Quan Bai and the others wanted, Xiao Xian took out 50 of them and the Taiha people exchanged for it with herbs. Xiao Xian asked Duo Kong to discuss the rest with them while Xiao Xian took the notes back to study the cloud pattern. One had to admit that the craftsmen of Taiha had indeed wanted to carry on the path of imitation to the end. Unfortunately, they had kicked an iron door and could not open it. The cloud patterns of the Xia people looked simple, but it was always difficult to understand. Luckily, the notes they left behind inspired Xiao Xian. Although they couldn't completely decipher the cloud pattern, their ideas and the questions they answered made Xiao Xian's mind light up. In the following days, Xiao Xian locked himself in his room to decipher the Xia people's cloud pattern. Then, Chi came to him dejectedly. Seeing Xiao Xian's bloodshot eyes, Chi was shocked. Elder Xiao Xian, did you fail too? Fail what? Xiao Xian rubbed his eyes and asked in confusion. The things I planted. Huh? Planted what? The 1,000-grain gold, of course. Xiao Xian, He was so busy deciphering the cloud pattern that he completely forgot about the 1,000-grain gold in his backyard. Chapter 402. Chi-Chi's words reminded Xiao Xian of the precious 1,000-grain gold in his backyard. It was said that the more precious something was, the more fragile it was and had to be protected. Xiao Xian sighed as he thought about the sprouts and the days he had been cooped up in his house. He no longer had any hope. When Chi-Chi saw Xiao Xian's reaction, she realized this elder had probably forgotten about the 1,000-grain gold and did not care at all. If it had been anyone else, Chi-Chi would have started scolding and beating them up. However, this was the elder of the tribe, second only to the chief and the shaman. He was also the owner of the 1,000-grain gold. She did not dare to scold him, much less beat him up. No matter how furious she was, she could only take a deep breath and suppress her emotions. Then again, her own crops had all failed, she had no right to criticize him. It was a pity that this young elder was too young and did not realize the importance of the 1,000-grain gold. Chi-Chi sighed. Let's go take a look. Xiao Xian tidied up the thick, dry leaves beside him that served as a notebook, then brought Chi-Chi to the backyard. Previously, when he heard that Xiao Xian was planting some precious crops here, Duo Kong specially brought people over to wrap a piece of cloth around the wooden fence to prevent the naughty kids from kicking pebbles and other things inside. That was why these few days, not just Xiao Xian, even the people who walked past Xiao Xian's house every day couldn't see what was going on inside. Those who were curious did not dare to peek into Xiao Xian's house either. The elder's position was very powerful in this aspect. He had lost all hope, but when Xiao Xian opened the back door and looked into the yard, he realized that there were many green sprouts swaying in the wind. The last time Xiao Xian looked, only half of them had sprouted, but this time, there were more than 80 sprouts. The last 30 sprouts had probably sprouted later, so Xiao Xian did not notice them last time. The sprouts were not very tall, only a little taller than Xiao Xian's ankles. Although they were growing slowly and did not look very energetic, they were still alive. This. Chi-Chi looked at the small yard and the sprouts on the ground. She was so shocked she did not know what to do. She quickly walked forward and looked at the ground. Because no one had watered or fertilized them, some parts had cracked. Elder, how did you plant them? Chi asked Xiao Xian. I planted them like you did. You saw it the last time too. I watered them a little when they sprouted, but I did not use the fertilizer. Xiao Xian pointed at a vat in the corner. It was the fertilizer Chi had given him. Chi had told Xiao Xian to water the sprouts when they grew. But Xiao Xian had forgotten about it when he got busy. He had put all his attention on the cloud patterns and did not remember about the sprouts, fertilizer, and watering. Chi did not doubt Xiao Xian's words. She had occasionally gone up the mountain to talk to Xiao Xian about the 1,000-grain gold sprouts. But every time she came, Xiao Xian would close the door so she did not disturb him. This time, it was really urgent and she had to knock on the door. Looking at the sprouts, Chi-Chi's face was full of guilt. Elder, I have disappointed you. What's wrong? Are there problems with the sprouts? Xiao Xian asked. Chi-Chi's face was red and she felt even more guilty. She did not know what to say. It was not just problems. The sprouts that were growing well were starting to wilt. Chi brought Xiao Xian to a few fields. From the top of the mountain to the bottom of the mountain, the situation was similar. It was fine at the start and everyone was happy. But as they grew, they started to wilt. Chi told Xiao Xian about the sprouts' growth. Xiao Xian could not understand it either. Chi and the rest had taken good care of the sprouts. They should have been growing well when they first sprouted. How could they wilt? Could it be that they did not have enough nutrients? Chi and the rest had prepared the fertilizer and watched over the sprouts every day. When they heard Xiao Xian say that the area where they found the 1,000-grain gold was dry, they reduced the number of times they watered the sprouts. They only watered the sprouts according to the situation. Not acclimatized. They had sprouted leaves and were growing well at the start. But as they grew, they wilted and died one by one. Qi and the rest were heartbroken. The few elders did not sleep for a few days. They discussed and tried all sorts of methods but to no avail. Now, there were only about 20 sprouts left in the 10 plots of land. They were much taller than the ones in Xiao Xian's backyard. They were knee-high but they were wilting. They were even worse than the ones in Xiao Xian's backyard. Thinking about it, Xiao Xian couldn't come up with a reason. Then, "Elder, what should we do next?" Qi asked carefully. She was worried that Xiao Xian would scold them. When Xiao Xian gave them the seeds, they promised to do their best. But in the end, they failed to live up to Xiao Xian's expectations. Xiao Xian thought about the progress of deciphering the cloud patterns. He did not plan to stop halfway. It was rare for him to find an idea. He did not want to stop and think about other things. Compared to the 1,000-grain gold, he was more interested in the cloud patterns. The more he understood, the more he felt that the cloud patterns contained a huge secret about the Xia people. After thinking about it, Xiao Xian said, "How about this? Please help me take care of the sprouts in my backyard." Ah! Qi looked up in shock. Xiao Xian's decision was not only not to scold them, but also to entrust them with important tasks. How could she do that? But Qi was still curious about the sprouts in Xiao Xian's backyard. She wanted to know if the sprouts were still alive because they were not tall enough or because of other reasons. But what if the sprouts? Qi tugged at her muddy clothes nervously. She was in a dilemma. "Don't worry. Even if all the sprouts die, I will not blame you. They are hard to grow anyway. Since they can't be grown, I will cook the remaining grains for everyone to eat," Xiao Xian said. Qi's face twitched. Such precious seeds were eaten. After Xiao Xian made his decision, he followed Qi's suggestion and opened a small door at the wooden fence in the backyard. According to Qi, they would definitely go over every day. They might even go over a few times a day. It was inevitable that they would disturb Xiao Xian. They just had to open a small door at the fence in the backyard for her to enter. They would take care of the other things themselves. Xiao Xian did not need to care. That afternoon, Xiao Xian made a movable door at the wooden fence. Since no one would dare to barge in, he did not even need to tie a rope. Closing the door, Xiao Xian's eyes swept across the courtyard. He felt that something was missing. When he was about to enter the house, he suddenly stopped at the door. Xiao Xian looked down at his feet. At the back door, there was a weed. When Xiao Xian entered, his trousers swept across the weed, so he noticed it. Weed, he turned around and looked at the yard. He thought back to the time when the 1,000-grain gold sprouted. Xiao Xian remembered that there were many other unknown weeds growing in the yard. At that time, Xiao Xian was thinking about the cloud pattern. He planned to wait until the seedlings were bigger before getting rid of them. Who knew that he would wait until now? It had been more than 20 days. Xiao Xian did not even go out for a hunt. It had been more than 20 days, and in such warm weather, the annual weeds should have grown even more vigorously, right? But the truth was, there were only a few weeds in the yard. Most of them were spread far away from the seedlings. The weeds from 20 days ago were long gone. Xiao Xian found a thick leaf without writing and recorded this discovery. He would look at it later. After entering the house, Xiao Xian continued to decipher the cloud patterns. He could already decipher the general meaning of the cloud patterns. Although he had only deciphered 2 cloud patterns and there was still a thick stack of cloud patterns to be deciphered, it was good to have some progress. Xiao Xian would decipher all the cloud patterns on the cauldron. In the following days, other than going out to hunt, Xiao Xian spent most of his time deciphering the cloud patterns in the house. As for the 1,000-grain gold seedlings in the backyard, he would only occasionally take a look at them when he was resting. When he came back from his hunt, Xiao Xian asked about the situation of the Qi seedlings. In the 10 plots of land on the mountain, only 2,000-grain gold seedlings were still alive. They were the 2 slowest growing seedlings. They didn't look like they could last much longer. The 80 seedlings in Xiao Xian's backyard were also growing faster under the care of Qi and the rest. The seedlings in Xiao Xian's backyard were almost as tall as the seedlings they took care of before. However, when they reached this height, it was as if they couldn't cross the threshold. They changed their growth pattern and started to wither until all of them died. That was why Qi and the rest were worried as they watched the seedlings grow taller by the day. For the sake of the seedlings in Xiao Xian's backyard, Qi even invited some people to the Taihe tribe to exchange their experiences. They wanted to lower their status and learn something useful from the Taihe people. If they could take care of the seedlings, they would be able to answer to Xiao Xian. However, the situation in the Taihe tribe wasn't good either. They only lasted a little longer than them. Once the seedlings reached that stage, they withered. When Qi and the rest went over, the Taihe people wanted to go over to Yanjiao to take a look. Fertilizing the land, plowing the soil, improving the soil, everything was done. The seedlings were so healthy. Why did they wither in the blink of an eye? As expected of the precious 1,000-grain gold. They were so hard to take care of. Everyone was worried. Because of the Taihe people's meticulous care, the seedlings grew too quickly. Although they were planted later, they were still growing faster than the ones in Xiao Xian's yard. But once the seedlings reached that stage, they withered. There was no helping it. They heard that only the ones in Xiao Xian's backyard were left. Hence, the Taihe people went over to Yanjiao every day to take a look. Seeing that the seedlings were growing faster under the care of Yanjiao and Taihe people, and that they were about to reach that threshold, Qi and the rest were even more worried. They couldn't sleep at night. It was as if they had an anxiety disorder. Xiao Xian, on the other hand, had been deciphering the cloud patterns behind closed doors. He did not experience their fear at all. Chapter 403. Xiao Xian wrote down all the cloud patterns he could decipher on an animal skin scroll and the ones he couldn't decipher on another scroll. Then, he tidied up and slept for 2 days. After resting, Xiao Xian's dizziness from deciphering the cloud patterns was gone. He felt refreshed and heard voices in the backyard. Thinking about the seedlings, he went to the backyard. Taihe's Quan Bai and the other 5 had been living in the Yanjiao tribe. They followed Qi and the rest up the mountain to Xiao Xian's backyard to take care of the seedlings. If they had anything to discuss, they would not do it in the yard. If they spoke, they would lower their voices to avoid disturbing Xiao Xian. When Xiao Xian opened the back door and looked into the backyard, he found a dozen old men and women squatting in his backyard. There were also people standing outside the backyard, craning their necks to look inside. He then looked at the seedlings in the field. Judging by their height, they were already above his knees. They were green and in good condition. When they saw Xiao Xian, Qi, Quan Bai and the rest quickly stood up. "How is it?" Xiao Xian asked. Qi was confused and excited, replying, "There are 62 left. A while ago, the seedlings here had also died." When they saw the wilting seedlings, Qi, Quan Bai and the rest felt helpless. They even wanted to give up. But soon, they found that not all seedlings were wilting. Most of them were still fine. Someone suggested to pull out the wilting seedlings. He felt that the wilting seedlings were infected. If they were left in the field, they would spread the disease to the other seedlings. When they were planting in Taihe, they were reluctant at first. Later, more and more seedlings were like this, so they pulled out the rest. Unfortunately, they were all wiped out in the end. However, after some consideration, Chi did not uproot the seedlings directly. They had tried uprooting the sickly seedlings in their 10 plots of land, but to no avail. It was the same whether they uprooted the seedlings or not. Therefore, he didn't bother about it and continued to stay in the field. Luckily, the other 60-plus stalks were still growing healthily. As the days passed, there were no signs of illness. Chi's worries were gradually put to rest. This made her overjoyed. Xiao Xian looked at the few dead seedlings in the field and didn't pay much attention to them. It was already beyond his expectations that more than 60 of them could survive. Xiao Xian had originally thought that if he couldn't plant it, he would just eat the remaining grains. But now, it seemed that he should wait a little longer. The few people from Taihe were very concerned about Xiao Xian's attitude. They were afraid that Xiao Xian would chase them away, so they were very obedient. Even when Duo Kong made fun of them several times, they didn't argue. Seeing that Xiao Xian didn't chase them away, Quan Bai was slightly relieved. At the same time, he was thinking about why the 1,000 gold seedlings in Xiao Xian's backyard could survive that hurdle. Could it be that the seeds given were different? When he thought about this, Quan Bai denied it. The seeds planted by Chi and the others had all died. Xiao Xian wouldn't use inferior seeds to fool them. Why was that? Xiao Xian didn't know either, but he wasn't that stubborn. When he returned to the house, Xiao Xian thought of something and opened the storage room where he stored the food. The storage room was near the back door and beside it was the kitchen. Sometimes, Xiao Xian would just take food from the storage room and go next door to cook. Xiao Xian remembered that because he was busy with the cloud patterns, he didn't even use a pot, didn't cook soup, didn't roast meat, and only ate the dried meat. It was more convenient that way. When he was hungry, he would eat a piece of dried meat and drink some water before continuing to decipher the cloud patterns. Thinking back, Xiao Xian remembered that when he prepared the dried meat, other than the marinated meat, he also kept a fresh beast leg. He planned to roast it. Because he had just returned from a hunt, he brought back a lot of trophies. He didn't have a place to put the leg, so he just threw it on the ground. When he was about to roast the meat in the storage room, he suddenly had an idea. He dropped what he was doing and rushed to decipher the cloud patterns. He was so busy that he didn't go back to the storage room. Logically speaking, the beast leg that wasn't marinated and dried should have rotted in the storage room. However, Xiao Xian didn't smell a strong rotting smell. Xiao Xian opened the door of the storage room and looked inside. There was light coming in from the window, so the situation inside was clear at a glance. Xiao Xian's gaze stopped on the ground. There was a piece of beast skin there. The protruding part was similar to the shape of a bone, but the other parts had sunk in and were stuck to the ground. Other than that, there was something else on the beast skin. Xiao Xian walked closer to take a look. He found that it was something like a plant's root system. It was very thin and slightly white, as if it could be broken with a casual pull. However, it was this thin and weak thing that went up from the ground, penetrated the beast skin, and then from another place, penetrated the beast skin again, and plunged into the ground. That was the beast skin of a fearsome beast. Even a stone knife of slightly inferior quality wouldn't be able to cut it. But now, this beast skin seemed to be sewn to the ground. Xiao Xian pulled slightly, but it didn't budge. He had to use force. However, Xiao Xian didn't intend to tear it apart by force for the time being. He used his black knife to cut open the beast skin. There was almost no flesh under the beast skin, only bones. The beast leg that Xiao Xian had thrown here was about a meter long, but now there was only skin and bone left. Where did the white roots come from? Xiao Xian stood up and looked out the window. On the other side of the window was the backyard. There were only the 1,000 grain gold in the backyard now. Even the weeds were weak. Now, because Chi and the rest were taking care of the weeds, they pulled them out whenever they saw them. But what about before? Before Chi came, there weren't any weeds in the backyard. Xiao Xian gently kicked the white root that had pierced through the animal skin. He went out and carefully looked around the house, but he didn't find any other white roots. Using his special vision, Xiao Xian saw below the ground. The white roots did indeed extend from the backyard where the 1,000-grain gold was planted. However, the roots were too deep and Xiao Xian couldn't see clearly. After thinking about it, Xiao Xian didn't tell Chi and the rest about this. He wasn't sure if that was the root of the 1,000-grain gold, so he didn't throw any more meat on the ground. Another 10 days passed. Something happened to the seedlings in the yard. Chi and Quan Bai were worried. A few of them started to wilt. They were worried. Some even guessed that it was a second hurdle. Quan Bai even went back to Taihe to bring some special fertilizers. There were animal fertilizers and plant fertilizers. These fertilizers helped to alleviate the wilting. The number of sickly plants didn't increase. However, the sickly plants started to die. Quan Bai and the rest couldn't save them no matter how hard they tried. 62 stalks, 7 of them gone in one go. Chi, Quan Bai, and the others were pounding their chests in pity. However, a few days later, the situation changed again. More plants started to wilt. This time, everyone panicked. What should they do? Xiao Xian asked for a piece of fresh meat. He didn't clean it up. He brought it to the storage room and placed it on top of the beast skin that was sewn to the ground. The next day, when Xiao Xian went to take a look, he saw another white root on top of the ground. The white root was stuck into the meat. The change was obvious. It shrunk every day until only a piece of beast skin was left. There was a white root sticking out of it. It was similar to the previous situation. After that, the remaining 52,000 grain gold plants in the backyard didn't show any signs of illness other than the 3 plants that showed signs of withering. This made Chi and Quan Bai heave a sigh of relief. However, they were still confused. Xiao Xian didn't explain to them. Xiao Xian stared at the 2 pieces of beast skin on the ground. After a while, he patted the white root with his knife. 1,000 grain gold. What a picky eater. As the days passed, the long and narrow needle-shaped leaves on the 1,000 grain gold plant gradually increased in number. They grew longer and swayed energetically in the wind. After discovering the white roots in the storage room, Xiao Xian would cut off some meat and place it on the floor of the storage room every time he came back from a hunt. After checking, he confirmed that the roots were from the 1,000 grain gold plants. It was even possible that all 50 plants were connected to one root. The mountain was huge and there was still some distance between each house. Other people would not leave fresh meat on the ground for too long. It was only because Xiao Xian was too busy that he forgot to clean it up. That was why such a situation happened. As soon as Xiao Xian stopped supplying the meat, there would be problems in the backyard, and the people who took care of that piece of land panicked again. After that, Xiao Xian told Chi about his discovery. He brought her to the storage room to see the leftovers and the white roots. Maybe there are other fertilizers that can support its growth. But for now, this is the only way. Xiao Xian pointed at the beast skin on the floor. Chi was shocked. While Xiao Xian was still thinking about how wasteful it was, she was already excited. It's good that you know the reason. As for the meat required for this method, it wasn't a big deal. It wasn't winter now. They could bring back a lot of food every time they hunted. She could eat less, but she couldn't save on the 1,000 grain gold. There were less than 40 plants left in the field. Chi didn't want to see any more plants wither and die. Meat? Here. 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 When Quan Bai and the others found out, they were even more enthusiastic than the Yanjiao people. If the Yanjiao people couldn't afford it, the Taiha people would do it for them. Xiao Xian didn't agree to let Quan Bai and the others bring meat. He could handle it himself. However, Xiao Xian also thought that he wouldn't plant it again after this time. This thing was too picky. Chapter 404. After the 1,000 gold grain seeds were fed with fearsome beast meat, they seemed to dislike the meat. 2 more plants died in the field. Seeing this, Chi and the rest threw a few pieces of fearsome beast meat on the ground. If Xiao Xian wasn't an elder, Chi and Quan Bai would have teamed up to criticize him. They thought that Xiao Xian didn't care about the 1,000 gold grain seeds. In fact, Xiao Xian didn't care much about it. Plus, he had been busy deciphering the cloud patterns, so he didn't pay much attention to the seeds. Xiao Xian had eaten the 1,000 gold grain seeds before and felt the benefits it brought. However, he didn't think the benefits were that amazing. There were at least 3 plants in the Taiha tribe that could compare to it. Plus, the way they planted it was much simpler and the harvest was better. If the 1,000 gold grain seeds they produced were like what Xiao Xian had eaten before, it wasn't worth it. The tribe didn't rely on farming for a living. Every time they went out to hunt, they could get medicinal plants and fruits. Why would they put in so much effort to plant these 1,000 gold grain seeds? Plus, hunting fearsome beasts was very dangerous. No one in the tribe would be willing to risk their lives just to get a few seedlings. As for Chi and Quan Bai, they had never tried it before. Who knew if they would still be as passionate after experiencing such hardships and tasting the 1,000 grain gold? One day, Xiao Xian rubbed his tired eyes and walked out of the house. He walked into the yard and saw the 1,000 gold grain seeds that he hadn't seen for a few days. Suddenly, he stopped stretching. He wasn't sure if it was because of the competition, but even with the supply of fearsome beast meat and fertilizers, 1 or 2 plants would die every once in a while. Now, there were only 34 plants left. Each plant was almost as tall as Xiao Xian's shoulder. He didn't know when they would be able to plant. What surprised Xiao Xian were the leaves of the 1,000 gold grain seeds. They were wider and longer than Xiao Xian remembered. Each plant was thicker than the ones he saw at the top of the mountain surrounded by rats. He held a needle-like leaf between his fingers and felt it. It felt different. Was it because the conditions were better? Was that why they were stronger? If that was the case, would the grains they produced have stronger medicinal properties? Would they be more beneficial? Xiao Xian checked the other 30 plants. Every plant that was still alive had bigger leaves than the ones Xiao Xian saw. According to Chi, they were still growing and would grow taller. He didn't know what they would become by then. If the harvest was better than the effort, he could continue experimenting with the seeds he had left. If the losses outweighed the gains, Xiao Xian would keep some and feed the rest to the tribesmen. Who knew how long those grains would be effective? He didn't ask Ji. Here, even the experienced Taiha people couldn't tell him. Xiao Xian flicked the needle-like leaves and said softly, "Let's see if you can give me a satisfactory result." It had been almost half a year since the beginning of winter last year. Their progress was significant. They had finally touched the door. They were slightly better than the ancestors of the Taiha tribe. After all, they had absorbed their results and thoughts. However, there was still a certain degree of difficulty in opening the door. Xiao Xian was stumped. It was as if he saw the door and desperately wanted to open it to see what was behind it. However, there was a lock on the door and Xiao Xian didn't know how to open it. "It's so hard." Xiao Xian sighed. He went out and walked around the tribe. After talking to Duo Kong and Guang Yi, Xiao Xian understood that the shamaness and chief had sent a team to the coast where Xiao Xian came from. When Xiao Xian brought his people there, he left a group to guard the coast. Every once in a while, the shamaness and chief would send another group to exchange with them. Then, they would continue to observe the coast. They only wondered if there would be a day when there would be a change on the coast that would make them happy. After walking around, Xiao Xian saw Qi Qi and Quan Bai taking care of the 1,000-grain gold plants in the yard. They came twice a day. Sometimes, when the weather changed, they came more often. They even stayed on the mountain. Because of the 1,000-grain gold, the relationship between the Taihe people and the Yanjiao people had improved. The Taihe people even revealed some of their secret techniques. If the 1,000-grain gold plants could bear fruit that satisfied them, they would have to show their sincerity if they wanted more grains. When Xiao Xian stepped into the backyard, he heard Quan Bai holding a scroll and talking to the Yanjiao people. Back then, our tribe's ancestors found the dry water green here. Quan Bai's voice was filled with pride and satisfaction. The dry water green was a type of medicinal herb. It grew in a special environment. It liked drought when it was young. It wouldn't germinate when it was wet. Instead, its seeds would rot. Once it grew to a certain stage in the arid land, due to the rainfall in the mountains, if a spring appeared in the growing area, the drought water green would continue its second stage of growth in the water surrounded by the spring until it bloomed and bore fruit. Because the seedlings, flowers and fruits were all green, the Taihe people named it the dry water green. It was a good medicine for internal and external injuries. The tribe often traded the dry water green from the Taihe people. The warriors would bring some with them when they went hunting. It was said that most of the herbs planted by the Taihe tribe were found by the ancestors of the Taihe tribe many years ago. Then, after many generations of searching, they found the most suitable way to plant them. As for where the Taihe people found the herbs, it was always kept a secret. It was an important source of income for the Taihe people. They wouldn't tell anyone. It was only because of the 1,000-grain gold incident that they talked about it a little. However, some of the important parts were vague and did not go into detail. Xiao Xian was curious. He leaned over to look at the scroll in Quan Bai's hand. It was a map. More accurately, it was a simplified map. Before showing it to the Yanjiao people, Quan Bai personally simplified the original map and blurred out some details. It was like drawing a tree without leaves, only the trunk and branches. But when Xiao Xian saw the lines on the scroll, his eyes twitched. This map looked familiar. After thinking for a while, Xiao Xian's pupils dilated. What are those curved lines? Xiao Xian asked. Quan Bai was so engrossed in his explanation that he didn't notice Xiao Xian behind him. He was shocked by Xiao Xian's sudden question. He dared to show off in front of others but not in front of Xiao Xian. After all, the 1,000-grain gold belonged to Xiao Xian. He had a favor to ask of him. Hearing Xiao Xian's words, Quan Bai adjusted his expression and put on a smile. Those are rivers. The thick ones represent big rivers, the thin ones represent small rivers. Here, this is the river in your hunting area. Because in Yanjiao's hunting area, the rivers weren't drawn in detail. Quan Bai said that it was drawn 1,000 years ago before the Yanjiao people came here. As for this small river, they didn't draw it. Xiao Xian knew about the river that Quan Bai was talking about. When he was looking for the glowing stones, he heard about it from others. The river that they dug for the glowing stones should have been filled with water by now. It was just that it wasn't marked on Quan Bai's map. Xiao Xian's attention wasn't on the small river branches. What he cared about was the thickest river and the few important branches that extended from it. The main river was curved and only part of it was drawn on the map. The two ends weren't completely drawn. It was said that one end was the sea and the other was the center of the continent. But just the lines of the river were already of great help to Xiao Xian. He had already solved one of the problems he faced while deciphering the cloud patterns. Quan Bai was worried that Xiao Xian would ask about some secret things and was thinking about how to reject him. But when he heard that Xiao Xian only asked about the rivers and some unimportant geographical information, he heaved a sigh of relief. He didn't ask about the place where their ancestors found the herbs. After getting the information he wanted, Xiao Xian patted Quan Bai's shoulder happily. Thank you. Then, Xiao Xian rushed back into the house. Quan Bai was confused by Xiao Xian's reaction. He looked at the others and asked Chi, "What's wrong with your young elder?" "Who knows?" Chi didn't know what Xiao Xian was thinking about, but she didn't ask. Even if she knew, she wouldn't tell the Taihe people. There were interactions between the two tribes, but if it wasn't approved by the shaman and chief, they wouldn't talk about it. The matter that the elder was thinking about should be quite important, so he couldn't tell anyone about it. On the other side, Xiao Xian rushed back into the house and closed the door. He moved a stack of leaves to the left of the table. These leaves had cloud patterns drawn on them, but he couldn't decipher them. He couldn't even guess. But when he saw the lines on the map in Quan Bai's hand, he realized that the cloud patterns he couldn't decipher weren't words, they were lines. Lines that represented geographical locations. When he reached a bottleneck in deciphering the cloud patterns, Xiao Xian stared at the cloud patterns on the cauldron. Even if he closed his eyes, he might not be able to draw the lines perfectly, but he wasn't far off. Xiao Xian had memorized the patterns. When he was immersed in his thoughts for too long, he would automatically think about the cloud patterns when he looked at the map in Quan Bai's hand. That was why he could think of the things he couldn't decipher when he looked at the map in Quan Bai's hand. He unfolded the stack of leaves and arranged them according to the pattern on the cauldron. Then, Xiao Xian took out a tree branch and tried to draw on the sand table. He removed the exaggerated or hidden lines and left the important ones. The cloud patterns on the cauldron were actually a combination of words and drawings. Chapter 405. After 2 sleepless days of deciphering, Xiao Xian drew the final result on an animal skin scroll. Although he did not understand the cloud patterns on the cauldron, Xiao Xian already knew a lot from what he had pieced together. The cloud patterns around the cauldron were like a guide. Most of the Xia people's cauldrons, no, not just cauldrons, but other objects would have such cloud patterns. Just as Zheng Luo said, these cloud patterns were different from the decorative cloud patterns other craftsmen made when they were casting bronze. These patterns had inherent secrets and were almost publicly displayed to the world, but few people knew about them. These cloud patterns were complicated, but every successful Xia person had to master them. It was like an anti-counterfeiting symbol. Back then, the ancestors of the Taihe tribe could not replicate it even if they wanted to. Not only that, after deciphering the cloud patterns, Xiao Xian felt that they contained an even greater secret. Perhaps it was a secret about the Xia people or something more important. What were the Xia people good at? Forging. It was said that they were also good at making precision objects. The cauldrons they made were almost perfect circles. As for why there was a cauldron that failed to be forged, Xiao Xian did not know for now. However, from what he heard from others, the Xia people were indeed very capable. Did the secret about the Xia people also involve forging? In the information he deciphered from the cloud patterns, it mentioned a place. Xia descendants had to go there before they were considered true Xia people and worthy of the surname Gongjia. Otherwise, they were failures of the Xia people. Xiao Xian did not know how many years ago the Xia ancestors set this cloud pattern, but this cloud pattern had existed for at least 1,000 years. It had existed even before the Yanjiao people arrived. Forging. This was indeed something that Xiao Xian was very interested. If he could master it, he would be able to master half of the Xia people's skills. His tribe's bronze wares would take a huge step forward. In this aspect, the Yanjiao people were indeed far behind. This tribe was still alright. The tribe on the other side of the sea probably still did not have their own metal weapons. However, there was a core seed there. If they went back one day, everyone would be able to use the skill. As for the flat cauldron in the house, the cloud patterns on the 3 legs represented 3 words, Gongjia Mountain. The pattern left behind by the Xia people was ultimately referring to Gongjia Mountain. From the name, could it be the Xia headquarters? Or was it their ancestral land before the Xia tribe split up? No matter what, Xiao Xian planned to follow the pattern and look around. If he could find the place and learn something from the Xia people, Xiao Xian's time would not have been wasted. Xiao Xian went to the shamaness and the chief to discuss this. The chief wanted to send someone to follow Xiao Xian, but there were only a handful of people who had the ability to follow Xiao Xian. Following Xiao Xian was not a burden. If they randomly sent someone, it would only affect Xiao Xian's movements. That was why only Guang Yi and Duo Kong were qualified. In the end, Xiao Xian decided to go alone. He did not know how long he would be gone this time. The tribe still had a few trades with other tribes, so he needed Duo Kong and Guang Yi to lead them. Xiao Xian himself had to stay in the tribe to hold the fort. Plus, the place he was going to was not familiar to the tribesmen, so the others could not lead the way. Since I can find this place alone, I can go anywhere else. Don't worry, Xiao Xian said to the shamaness and the chief. However, the shaman and the chief were still quite worried, and they took out some forged weapons and medicines. Xiao Xian did not reject their kindness. He took a sword from Zheng Luo and some medicine from the shamaness. The shamaness had taught Xiao Xian how to recognize these medicines, so he knew how to use them. It doesn't matter if we can't find Gongjia Mountain. Forging skills are not as important as staying alive. The shamaness reminded Xiao Xian to come back if he could not handle it. Zheng Luo had the same thought. Although the cloud patterns Xiao Xian mentioned might have something to do with the Xia ancestral land and forging skills, he was more concerned about Xiao Xian. After all, Xiao Xian was the only person from the other tribe who came here safely. He was also an elder acknowledged by the ancestors. If anything happened to him, would the ancestors still protect them? Zheng Luo still wanted to bring the tribe back to Yanjiao's ancestral land when he was still alive. I know. Xiao Xian nodded. You know nothing. The shamaness and chief cursed silently. They had no choice. If Xiao Xian was as mature as Guang Yi, they would not have to worry. However, Xiao Xian was too young. They were worried about a young man's temperament. The 1,000-grain gold's illness had been solved. Qi and the rest could take care of it. Xiao Xian did not have to worry. Hence, on a sunny day, Xiao Xian set off to find the Xia's secret. The first place he went was the river where he dug the water sun stones. After winter, when the snow melted, other than melting snow, there was also more rain. The river had risen. There were more crocodiles in the river. Every time the hunting party went hunting, they would go around this area. These crocodiles were very aggressive. They did not care who was on the river bank. All humans, wild animals, fearsome beasts were their prey. In terms of size, the crocodiles here were bigger than the ones Xiao Xian saw in the drumming tribe. There were also differences in their shapes. These crocodiles had longer snouts than the ones in the drumming tribe. Their upper jaw was longer than the lower jaw and they had more teeth. The drumming tribe's crocodiles had around 60 to 70 teeth. The crocodiles here definitely had more than 100 teeth. Their thick, nail-like teeth and their distribution in the crocodiles' mouths showed that these crocodiles were very good at catching prey. Their huge, sharp teeth could easily clamp down on their prey and drag them into the water to tear them apart. Their powerful biting ability and well-developed muscles allowed these seemingly clumsy fellows to move with exceptional agility. The crocodiles of the drumming tribe, because they lived with humans, were more or less tainted with human emotions. Even if it was only towards the people of the drumming tribe, it was still there. However, the crocodiles here wanted to kill everything. This was Xiao Xian's first impression of them. The sun was just right. Many of the crocodiles were lying on the shore, basking in the sun. Some of them were rolling around in the mud, some were biting each other, or perhaps they were fighting. From time to time, there would be some hissing sounds. When he was in the drumming tribe, Xiao Xian knew that these creatures that only knew how to bite and kill were actually very smart and cunning. They didn't have big brains, but their intelligence was far beyond people's imagination. When Xiao Xian lived in the drumming tribe, he once saw a child from the drumming tribe teasing a crocodile in the pond next to his house. Xiao Xian remembered that the child stood on the ground next to the pond. He didn't immediately throw the meat over. Instead, he first patted the crocodile's nose. This was like an agreement between them. After patting, the crocodile would open its mouth and wait for the child to throw the meat into its mouth before closing its mouth again. The second time, the child took out another piece of meat from the basket. However, the crocodile in the pond retreated a little. The child wanted to pat its nose, but he couldn't. So he walked a few steps towards the pond and finished the game of patting the crocodile's nose. The third time, the crocodile retreated a little further into the pond. The child continued to move forward. Both of his feet were already in the water. When the child threw the meat into the crocodile's mouth, the crocodile swallowed the food. Then it quickly bit the child's clothes and dragged him into the water. The child, who was standing there with the basket, was instantly dragged into the water. Xiao Xian, who was standing not far away, broke out in a cold sweat when he saw this scene. However, the people next to him told him that it was the tribe's Bao Yu playing with the children. They were just teasing the children. Sure enough, when Xiao Xian looked over again, the rolling crocodile only bit the child's clothes. It didn't really bite him. The child was laughing and playing with the crocodile in the water. The meat in the basket had all fallen into the water and was divided by the crocodile in the pond. It was just a game. However, the game of the beasts was closely related to hunting. At that time, Xiao Xian knew that the crocodiles knew how to strategy and how to lure their targets. On land, the crocodiles might be slightly inferior, but in the water, even the drumming tribe's people who were good at swimming were no match for the crocodiles. If the child was standing on the ground, his reaction might have been faster. However, he was lured into the pond by the crocodile and his movements were limited. He didn't even have time to move before he was dragged in. The people of the drumming tribe were used to it. In their eyes, it was just a game. However, in the eyes of others, the crocodiles were extremely dangerous demons. If the child was a member of another tribe, he wouldn't have been bitten by the crocodile. Instead, he would have been bitten by the crocodile's arm, leg or other body parts. After being dragged into the water, the possibility of him coming back to shore was very small. The crocodile's swaying dance and death roll were not a joke. The people outside the drumming tribe saw the crocodiles as killing machines. Xiao Xian wouldn't provoke these killing machines, so he stayed far away. He didn't even get close to the river bank. He just followed the river to find the right direction. Based on the patterns he deciphered, Xiao Xian followed the river until he found the bigger one. Then, he continued to follow the bigger one. The bigger river that didn't dry all year round was just an inconspicuous and easily overlooked tributary on the map. From Quan Bai and the rest, Xiao Xian knew that there were crocodiles in these rivers and they had been around for a long time. Before the Taiha ancestors looked for herbs, crocodiles lived in the rivers deep within the forest, especially the thickest main river on the map. Quan Bai said that their ancestors had records of crocodiles. They said that there were extremely large, strange fish and fearsome beasts there. They were not to be trifled with, so they had to run for their lives. Xiao Xian didn't know how big the crocodiles in the records were, but they were definitely bigger than the crocodiles in these tributaries. Most creatures would stop growing after they reached a certain stage of development, such as humans. However, some creatures didn't. They were in the category of unlimited growth, such as trees and the crocodiles that lived in the rivers deep in the forest. Chapter 406. It took Xiao Xian over 20 days to go from the small tributary in the hunting area to the wider river and then to the main river on the map. Xiao Xian had been hurrying along for the past 20 days without resting. He didn't expect it to take so long just to find the main river. No wonder the people of the Taiha tribe said that when their ancestors went out to search for medicinal plants, they would be gone for a year. If they were looking for seasonal plants that bloomed and bore fruit, the herb gatherers would wait even longer because they might miss the opportunity and have to wait for the next year. Xiao Xian didn't need to wait. He just needed to find the place. Xiao Xian climbed up a tree and stood on a branch. He took out his animal skin scroll and looked at the map he'd drawn, trying to guess his current location. There was no GPS, so he could only guess based on the places he'd passed and the general environment. The trees around him weren't tall and the ground was wet. There were many potholes and ponds and many aquatic plants. This was a swamp area. To find the main river as quickly as possible, Xiao Xian had passed through the dangerous swamp area instead of the safer mountainous area. Although the forest was dangerous too, it was still better than the swamp area. Now, the trees weren't too dense. The bottom of the trees shimmered. Xiao Xian had to pay attention to his surroundings as he looked at the map. This should be the place. It's not bad. Xiao Xian looked at a large river not far away, calculating how long it would take to find Gongjia Mountain. He only knew some vague geographical information. He couldn't find the details. If things didn't go well, it would take even longer. As he was thinking, Xiao Xian's eyelids twitched. He didn't even bother to keep the animal skin scroll in his hands. Instead, he leapt up with all his might. Just as Xiao Xian moved, the calm water under the tree split open. A huge, long, narrow mouth full of sharp teeth opened up, biting at where Xiao Xian had been standing. It was a huge crocodile, more than 10 meters long. As for how long it was, Xiao Xian had no time to speculate. Because of the sudden jump, some of the water plants and leaves floating on the water surface were also lifted high into the air. The slightly muddy water droplets scattered to the surroundings along with the waves. Xiao Xian could even smell the muddy water and the smell of aquatic plants, as well as a murderous stench. That pair of cold, emotionless eyes met Xiao Xian's in the air. It opened its mouth to bite, but Xiao Xian retreated first. It only bit the branch that Xiao Xian was standing on. Crack! The crisp snapping sound indicated that the branch, which was as thick as a person, was as easy as biting a biscuit for the crocodile. The place where Xiao Xian had been standing was at least 7 meters above the ground, but the crocodile had easily crossed this height, and even its entire head was higher. The big mouth continued to move upward, and Xiao Xian could see that the crocodile's nasal cavity was slightly larger than that of an ordinary crocodile. The crocodile didn't give up after missing its attack. Instead, it swung its head vigorously in the air, opened its mouth again, and swept towards Xiao Xian for a second bite. Based on the crocodile's hook-like teeth structure at the front of its snout, they were better at catching prey. As long as Xiao Xian was bitten anywhere on his body, even if it was just his trousers or the corner of his clothes, he would be tightly hooked and dragged down. However, Xiao Xian's reaction was too fast. Even though the crocodile had already made a second attempt, Xiao Xian still escaped from its biting range. He was only half a person's length away. However, the crocodile had already begun to descend, and it couldn't make a third bite. Its closed mouth made a banging sound, and its scaly jaws trembled from the action of biting, as if venting its master's unwillingness. In the end, the crocodile fell heavily into the water, splashing up a large amount of turbid water mixed with seaweed. After falling back into the water, the crocodile didn't get up again, but left with the ripples of the water. Xiao Xian landed on another tree, but he didn't stop. Instead, he continued to jump a few times. A 7 to 8 meter branch wasn't safe at all. He had to find a bigger tree to rest on. That would be safer. The water under the tree was deeper than he thought, or the crocodiles wouldn't be able to hide their bodies completely. While Xiao Xian was looking for a taller tree, he encountered another leaping crocodile. As Xiao Xian bounced away, he drew the bronze sword that Jing Luo had given him in the air. He twisted his waist and swung his arm with the sword, slashing the crocodile's mouth with great force. Clang! The vibrations from the sword showed the toughness of the crocodile's scales. However, Xiao Xian still managed to injure it, and the sword even pried off one of its teeth. If Xiao Xian had been stronger, he might have been able to cut a hole in the crocodile's jaw. Moving through the swamp was like moving through the crocodile's teeth. It was very dangerous, and because of this, the Taihe ancestors marked this swamp as an important place. If the Taihe descendants wanted to pass through this area, they had to be extra careful. The swamp was very wide. After Xiao Xian found a taller tree, he tried to find land. The river banks weren't all swamps. However, Xiao Xian didn't know where there was land. Even the Taihe ancestors left behind didn't mention it on the map. Xiao Xian could only rely on himself to find it. After putting away the map, Xiao Xian continued to jump above the swamp. He couldn't leave in the direction away from the river. Leaving the river bank would indeed allow him to leave the swamp faster, but if he did that, Xiao Xian wouldn't know if he could determine the location of the main branch. After all, the main branch had curved a few times and didn't flow in a straight line. After walking for half a day in the swamp beside the river, the swamp gradually narrowed. Xiao Xian saw a large forest in front of him. It was taller and more lush, and he could even see the mountains. The swamp was coming to an end. Xiao Xian thought to himself. The number of crocodiles in the area had decreased by a lot. Previously, he had seen many crocodiles on the banks of the river and in the swamp. However, the closer he got, the harder it was for Xiao Xian to see a single one. Just like the fierce beasts in the mountains, a large crocodile needed to occupy a large area in order to obtain food for it to survive. There were only a few crocodiles in such a large area. This place wasn't out of the danger zone that the Taihe ancestors had marked out. It should still be the crocodile's territory. There had to be a reason for this abnormality. Xiao Xian became even more vigilant. As he ran towards the forest, Xiao Xian caught a glimpse of something floating on the surface of the river. After jumping up a tall tree, Xiao Xian looked at the river. There was a clump of water grass on the surface of the river. However, upon closer inspection, Xiao Xian felt that something was amiss. The clump of water grass floated up and down on the surface of the river. Bang! The clump of water grass shook and floated up a little. Water splashed out from it. At the same time, Xiao Xian also felt that the sound of the collision was very strange. There was more than one sound just now. It seemed to be the sound of metal colliding. What was that? Xiao Xian stared at the clump of water grass. There seemed to be something inside. A crocodile? A crocodile trapped in the water grass? No, upon closer inspection, the clump of water grass was square, and on both sides of the water grass was wood. Due to the violent tremors, the water grass had loosened a little. The exposed areas on both sides were tree trunks. That wasn't water grass. It was a cage. It was a trap. Xiao Xian was shocked. If it was a trap, it meant that there were human activities in the area. Moreover, they had specially made a trap. Judging from the size, it was probably to catch prey in the water. Some fishermen caught fish by casting nets, some were good at fishing, and some used water traps to catch prey. However, the third type was extremely rare. This was Xiao Xian's first time seeing a crocodile trap. Bang bang! The trapped crocodile struggled again, causing the water grass to loosen even more. This allowed Xiao Xian to see the trap more clearly. It was a metal cage. People from Yanjiao, Taihe and other tribes would not use metal to make traps. Although bronze was becoming more common, they were very frugal with their use of bronze. Even if they wanted to make a trap, they would not use so much to make one. How big were the crocodiles in the river? A cage like this was at least 15 meters long. How much metal did it use? The further away they were from the great 6 cities, the less bronzeware they used. Xiao Xian had seen people from other tribes on his way here. The tribe he saw recently used horns and bones when they hunted, they rarely used bronzeware. Xiao Xian was very surprised to see such a huge metal cage. At the same time, Xiao Xian wondered if they were close to Gongjia Mountain. Other people did not use bronze, but the craftsmen were different. Plus, someone who could make a crocodile trap like this was definitely not an ordinary tribesman. Xiao Xian wasn't in a hurry to leave. He found a suitable tree and stood on top of it to hide, waiting. Since the trap had caught its prey, the person who said it would be here soon. If the crocodile in the cage continued to struggle, the trap would be damaged even more. Sure enough, not long after, Xiao Xian heard the sound of someone approaching quickly. The sound was not loud, and the person was very good at moving through the forest. Judging from the sound, the person should be very familiar with this area. When he moved, he was very decisive and did not hesitate to stop. He was very confident. The whooshing sound soon reached the riverbank not far away. Xiao Xian looked over and was stunned. He did not see the front, but at first glance, he thought it was a small crocodile moving around. But when he looked again, he realized it was actually a human figure. There were even human hands exposed. It really did look like a crocodile. Even when the drumming tribesmen were in totemic form, they did not look like this person. However, as he continued to observe, Xiao Xian realized it was actually a person wearing crocodile skin. When the drumming tribesmen used their totemic power to transform, their facial features and bones would change. This person only wore crocodile skin. His real appearance was not much different from a normal person. Chapter 407. After the man quickly came to the shore, he flipped through the grass, and then there was a crunching sound. Xiao Xian watched as the man pulled a thick vine. With the crunching sound, the vine was pulled out little by little, and the trap floating on the water quickly moved closer to the shore. The closer the trap was to the shore, the more the trapped crocodile struggled. However, compared to the crocodiles Xiao Xian had encountered before, this one was much weaker. If it was in its peak condition, the trap might not have been able to last so long with such a large crocodile. After the trap was pulled ashore, its full appearance was revealed. It was a square metal cage. In order to keep it afloat on the water, thick tree trunks were tied to both sides of the cage to keep it afloat. The cage and the tree trunks were covered with water plants, probably to cover up the trap. It was unknown whether this cover was for people or crocodiles. Some people thought that fish were stupid and would fall for obvious traps, so there was no need to cover up the traps. However, the crocodiles here were not stupid. Even if there were stupid ones in front of them, they might be able to avoid the obvious traps. Xiao Xian watched as the man pulled the cage ashore. He tore off the water plants tied to the cage, then took out a vine from the grass nearby and tied it to a metal rod. The end of the vine was tied into a circular noose. Then, the man opened the cage near the crocodile's head. The top of the cage was divided into 3 sections, and he had only opened 1/3 of the section near the head. After opening it, he put the metal rod tied to the noose inside, and the noose at the front of the rod was stretched toward the crocodile's mouth. The crocodile in the cage opened its mouth wide, revealing more than 100 teeth in its mouth. It was showing off its power to the man, and it couldn't wait to rush up and bite the man standing above it to death. The size of the noose was very suitable. With the strength and toughness of the vine, the noose could be maintained in a circle with a slight shake. The man neatly put the noose into the crocodile's mouth. If it was an inexperienced person, the noose might have gotten stuck between the crocodile's teeth, but the man succeeded on his first try. The noose directly wrapped around the crocodile's upper jaw. He opened the other 2 doors at the top of the cage. At the same time, the person moved the 4 corners of the cage. Then, the cage turned from a square to a flat open shape. The crocodile closed its mouth. Because of its nature, the first thing it thought of after its upper jaw was trapped was to bite. After closing its mouth, it couldn't bite through the vines. Its teeth weren't like herbivores that could grind the vines in its mouth. On the contrary, because the vines were wrapped around the gap between its teeth, it couldn't bite through them in one go. Now, it didn't have much strength to struggle free, so it used the crocodile's best skill, death roll. However, the tumbling of death in this situation only made it sink deeper into its predicament. Originally, the vines only wrapped around its upper jaw. Now that it was rolling, its mouth was bound. Without the restriction of the cage, the more it rolled to the side, the tighter its mouth was bound. After tying the crocodile's mouth, the man used other vines to add a few more loops around its mouth to be on the safe side. After that, the man found some large leaves and combined them with the vines to cover the crocodile's eyes. With its eyes covered, the crocodile's struggling movements decreased. Many fish could reduce their nervousness by tying their eyes. Obviously, crocodiles were similar to fish in this regard. The man knew the habits of crocodiles very well. The crocodile, whose mouth was tied and eyes covered, had its hind legs wrapped by the man's vines. Crocodiles were reptiles. When moving on the ground, their main strength came from their hind legs. The crocodiles that Xiao Xian encountered earlier were able to jump so high to bite Xiao Xian, who was standing on a tree. Other than their strong muscles, the crocodiles also had powerful thighs. Therefore, the man tied the crocodile's legs to restrict its movements. After tying its mouth, blindfolding its eyes, and binding its hind legs, the crocodile was lying there motionless. The man stood to the side and watched. Then, he pulled the vines and added a few more loops around the crocodile's mouth, covering almost all of its exposed teeth. Xiao Xian had experience. The crocodile's fangs were like knives when they shook their heads. They could easily hurt people. The man was sweating all over. He lifted the crocodile's hat back, revealing a dark face full of stubble. He put away the flat metal cage and hid it to the side. Then, he pulled the rope that tied the crocodile. The man suddenly turned and looked in Xiao Xian's direction. "You've been watching for so long. It's time to come out, right?" the man said. There was no anger in his voice. His tone was very calm, as if he didn't care at all. Xiao Xian didn't think that he would be discovered, so he didn't bother hiding anymore. He jumped down from the tree and walked over. He also put his sword in a conspicuous place. If he hid his weapon, it would make the other party feel threatened and hostile. The other party's attitude was kind, and he didn't have any bad intentions. Xiao Xian didn't want to offend him. The man's gaze swept across Xiao Xian, then paused when he saw Xiao Xian's sword. His eyes flashed with undisguised disdain. "Which tribe are you from?" asked the man. "The Yinjiao tribe." After guessing his identity, Xiao Xian didn't hide it. After all, he had more questions to ask. Besides, this man didn't look like someone who was easily fooled. The Yinjiao tribe? The man thought for a moment. "I think I've heard of it. Is it nearby?" "Yeah, it's quite far." "If it's so far away, why did you come to such a dangerous place?" "Are you here for training?" asked the man. "No." "Looking for herbs?" "No." "You're not here for Gongjia Mountain too, are you?" asked the man. Xiao Xian looked at him in surprise. He knew. "Really? You? And you're here for Gongjia Mountain?" The man looked at Xiao Xian as if to say, "You've overestimated yourself." He was looking for death. Are there a lot of people here for Gongjia Mountain?" Xiao Xian was curious. "Not many, but there are still a few people." However, as they searched, they ended up courting death. That person said in a flat tone. There was no sarcasm, no gloating. "Then you are, I'm Gongjia Heng." He didn't have to say much. One name was enough to reveal the most important information. When he announced his name, Hein was full of pride. The Xia people never hid their surname. They were proud of their surname, Gongjia, and their tribe. He really was a Xia. When Xiao Xian heard this, he was about to ask when the man continued, even I, a Xia, couldn't find Gongjia mountain. How did you foreigners find it? You're looking for death. No wonder Gongjia Hein was so calm towards the people who came to look for Gongjia mountain. He didn't look down on them. Even a proper Xia person like him couldn't find Gongjia mountain. Are there a lot of people looking for Gongjia mountain? Asked Xiao Xian. Not a lot, but it's not a small number either. I've been here for 20 years and I've met 17 people looking for Gongjia mountain. 10 of them were Xia people like me and 7 of them were outsiders. In the end, 9 of them died. 5 returned with injuries while the other 3 continued searching. I don't know where they died. Maybe they found Gongjia mountain, said Xiao Xian. Impossible. If I can't find it, how can they? Said Gongjia Hein confidently. If other people came, it meant that Xiao Xian wasn't the only one who solved the cloud pattern. However, not many people succeeded, so not many people came. However, finding Gongjia mountain was more difficult than Xiao Xian expected. If even the Xia people couldn't find it, then the chances of others were even slimmer. After all, the Xia people knew more about the cloud pattern and had more information. Because no one could find it, Gongjia Hein didn't care if Xiao Xian came. He waved at Xiao Xian. Come help me. I'll share some meat with you later. In the past, when Gongjia Hein caught a crocodile, he wouldn't kill it here. He still had stock, so he didn't plan to kill it yet. He would keep it for a few days and wait for his stock to run out before killing a new one. That was why he would drag the crocodile back to where he lived after catching it. The Xia people were good at casting and forging. Those who could cast were strong too. It was not good to have weak arms when forging. That was why compared to most people, the Xia people were stronger. In the past, Gongjia Hein would drag the crocodile back himself after catching it. In the past, he could use some tools like wheels. Now that he had used up a lot of materials, he had to drag it himself. It was too difficult to pull it himself, so he called Xiao Xian over to help. Here, you pull the tail, I'll pull the rope. Before he could finish, Xiao Xian picked up the tail and dragged the 10-meter-long crocodile forward. He walked so easily that he cut off Gongjia Heng's sentence. Your strength is not bad. Gongjia Heng pulled the rope for a while but realized he didn't have a chance to use his strength, so he let go. He stared at the crocodile to see if it was still tired and to prevent it from breaking its vines to attack people. Gongjia Heng had a large hammer in his hand. If anything happened, he would smash it. Is this crocodile drugged? Asked Xiao Xian. Crocodile? You mean it? Of course it's drugged or it wouldn't be so quiet, said Gongjia Heng. The bait he placed in the cage contained a drug that made the crocodile weak. The drug was very strong and could last for half a day. If the crocodile didn't eat it, he would continue to feed it the drug. Right, asked Xiao Xian, how did you know I was hiding there? He thought he was good at hiding and didn't make a sound. I felt someone watching, said Gongjia Heng. Xiao Xian thought back. It made sense. He was too focused on the crocodile. Gongjia Heng had lived here for 20 years, so he was very sensitive. Of course he noticed, you're tuning into the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.